Irish Breakdown Nation. Happy Monday. Happy almost one day closer to game day. I'm excited, right? I had a little bit of mixed emotions about it being a little bit shorter of a week, excuse me, for Notre Dame. But now I'm just happy because we don't have that long to wait. But it is Monday, which means we are going to be taking a little bit more of a deep dive into this matchup. Yesterday, Vince, Bryan, and I sat down and we talked about this matchup from a big picture standpoint. Today, we're going to dive a little bit more into the offensive side and in the defensive side. We're going to cover a lot of information today, and we're going to fit it into a good amount of time because somebody has a flight to catch down to Miami, which I am extremely jealous of because right now I'm sitting staring out my window at about 9 inches of snow. It hit Indianapolis pretty hard. So the roads down here are not the most ideal. There's a lot of snow down here, but going down to Miami, not just to enjoy the weather, but for a good cause. I took a look at the forecast and looks like on game day, it'll be 71 and clear skies for the guys down there. So
yeah, it doesn't suck.
No. So you'll be down there in your hula shirt or for a little bit of Miami Vice.
Yeah. Like I joke about that, but bro, you know me. I'm going to be wearing IB stuff and T-shirts and jeans and hoodies and you know how I roll.
No, I love it, man. I'm ready for, by the time we're doing shows on Wednesday, you're going to have a nice little tan. We're going to be in here doing some shows, man. It's going to be a lot of fun. But like I said, today we're going to dive into this matchup from an offensive perspective for Notre Dame and from a defensive perspective from Notre Dame. And Bryan, where we're going to start is going to be the Notre Dame offense versus the Penn State defense. And you and I were talking before the show, and when we were breaking down the Notre Dame game versus Georgia, Notre Dame's offense left a lot to be desired out on the field. And obviously, when you're watching the game, you can tell. When you take a look at the box score, you can tell. But Notre Dame has the opportunity to right the ship a little bit here because there are a lot of question marks heading into the Orange Bowl matchup against another really good quality defense in Penn State.
It is. I mean, look, that's something that Notre Dame has faced in the first 3 rounds as they faced really good defenses. And they haven't always they've done what they've needed to do, right? They've made the plays needed to win the games, but I do believe this. I don't get into you can't beat this team if you do this, and you can't beat that team if you do that. And I'm like, well, they keep winning games that way. But I think what I would say is you can't keep asking you shouldn't keep doing it this way. You shouldn't keep asking your defense to win games in certain ways and your special teams to win games in certain ways. You do need to do a better job of carrying your weight and not just doing enough. And so one of the things that we're going to break down today are what are the things that Notre Dame can do to get better and improve in some of those areas, because look, 21 points may be enough to win this game. It may be, but I would much rather just not test that theory, and eventually you put a defense, I don't care how good that defense is, you put them in enough bad spots, they're going to have an off day. Like let's talk about like Tennessee, for example, against Ohio State. Like their defense had a horrible start against Tennessee's defense had a horrible start against Ohio State. If their offense could have just done something, get them 14 points, 17 points, something to just stay in that game, and then your defense can make halftime adjustments and it keeps you in the game. Sometimes that happens. I think back to Notre Dame and North Carolina in 2020 when you're bolstered by, you had a great defense that you're, relative to the competition. But that North Carolina offense was high octane. Javonte Williams, Michael Carter, De'Ami Brown. You had Sam Howell, a quarterback. And Des Newsome was on that football team. He was a really good wide receiver. And so you look at it and you're like, boy, that's a high-scoring offense. Well, if you look at the course of the game, Notre Dame shut that offense down. They won 31-17. But they didn't stop them early. North Carolina scored on their first 2 possessions. Touchdown, boom, boom, just like that. But the Notre Dame offense, which actually started the game with a punt, and then Carolina scored, the offense came back and scored to tie it. North Carolina went down and scored, the offense came back and tied it. By the time that the defense was able to figure out North Carolina, it's still a tie ball game. And they're not down 14-0. And those are big things, Vince. Sorry, Trev. Those are big things for Notre Dame to be able to do. They're going to have to do that at some point in time. And look, maybe Penn State's not that game, but maybe it is. And that's why the Notre Dame offense is going to really have to step up and be on top of its game to really have a chance to it's not about winning the game, but win the game the way that they should, and then build some much needed offensive momentum going into the championship game should they beat Penn State. You have to start carrying your weight more. The special teams and the defense are flat out doing their job. Mitch Jeter has been money in the playoff, right? You've got a kick return for a score. Your defense has been playing lights out, against you held Georgia to 10 points and you held Indiana, in all honesty, to 3. If we're being honest about it. So the defense is going to have to obviously play well. We'll get to that later. But the offense is, to me, the unit that's going to decide whether or not Notre Dame continues playing and has a legitimate chance to win a championship. And we've seen them play that way at times in the past. They just haven't played that way in the postseason so far. And we'll see if they get that going. The encouraging thing is we haven't seen this offense really struggle for 3 straight games in a row this season. And the defense has carried them. Could this be the breakout performance? This be the game that the offense gets back on track? It's possible, but you're doing it against a really good Penn State defense.
Yeah, man, and we're already kind of starting to dive into the importance of this matchup overall, and you said it best. And, round 1, you face the number 1 rush defense in Indiana, and against Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, you're facing a defense that is littered with NFL talent, right? And Malachi Starks is going to be playing on Sundays. Nazir Stackhouse, Jalen Walker, C.J. Allen, all of these guys, right, are going to be playing on Michael Williams. All of those guys we're going to watch play Sundays somewhere around the country, right? And now you have another defense that is put together similarly, right, to what Georgia's was. Secondary is not what it was before.
Built similar,
front 7. Yeah,
built similar. Schematically, they're different, but what they're trying to accomplish is done in a very similar fashion. Yes.
Yep. So Notre Dame is going to have to right the ship against a defense, again, that is one of the better defenses in the country.
Shut down the run, get after the quarterback. That's what they want to do. Mm-hmm. And that's, like you said, a lot like Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk first, Trev. One thing I do want to dive into is how they're different, how Georgia and Penn State are different. And again, where they're similar, they both are very important gap control teams. The reason Penn State doesn't get gashed a whole lot in the run game is because they put a lot of pride in being aggressive, but being gap sound. They're not running 5-man overloads in the attempt to create negatives, but then also leaving themselves vulnerable to an easy cutback, gashing them, right? They use their secondary as really aggressive second-level fitters behind their linebackers who they'll trigger a lot. They, similar to Georgia, they do a lot of those linebackers twists up the middle. Georgia's big and physical and powerful. They have a bunch of 300-pounders, 320-pounders that they're throwing at Notre Dame in that game. This is a different unit. This is a unit that's not as big. Denai Dennis Sutton's got good size for a defensive end, but again, he's not a real big guy. You look at Zane Durant, he's 6'1", 288. Abdul Carter's a converted linebacker. They do have some size up the middle, Trev. I'm not going to say like they don't have any size at all, but they're not a team that's trying to out bully you. They got Alonzo Ford who plays a little bit. He's okay. He's 319. Devontae Thomas is 305, 6'1", 305. Keziah Azard is 6'3", 305. They're good sized players. They're not like little tiny fellas, but they're not playing a game the same way that Georgia does. They're more about penetration, getting movement, getting a push, knocking you back into the backfield. They don't run a ton of line games, but they run some. And the way that they watch Notre Dame play, I imagine they're going to ramp things up a little bit. But Georgia was about power at the front level and then speed on the second level. Penn State's about speed on both levels. They're about attacking you and beating you to spots on both levels. Defenses like that haven't been as good against Notre Dame this year. But they also haven't faced a defense, in my opinion, as good as Penn State's at that. And that's kind of a part of you could say teams who are run dominant have not fared well against Penn State this year if they can't throw the ball. But then my counter is but they haven't played anybody like Notre Dame yet, right? I mean, so it goes both ways. But this is a really good defense, but they go about things much differently. They did some interesting things against Boise, but they're primarily a 4-2-5 defense that will flip. They're almost, you know who they remind me a lot of? They remind me a lot of Clark Lee's defense at Notre Dame, where they're 4-2-5 personnel, but they'll flip between who that 1-5 guy is. Sometimes it's a linebacker. It'll be like Dom DeLuca, and they'll kind of do it out of more of a 4-3 personnel. Other times it's a true nickel, 4-2-5 nickel, a lot like Notre Dame did in 2018 that season with under Clark Lee. So, and similar to kind of what they were, not like he's more aggressive, Tom Allen, like Mike Elko was in 17. But in 17, Mike Elko was like Drew Tranquil played a ton at Rover. I mean, you didn't see him coming off the field a whole lot. Now it's a little bit of a different situation where, you know, they'll rotate more at that spot. And you know, so that's kind of how they're based. They fly to the ball. Their safeties are aggressive coming downhill. They're going to leave their corners on islands at times. They play one safety high. It varies who that is, but a lot of times it's Jalen Reed coming down. But you'll see plenty of Zaquee Watley coming downhill at times as well, depending on what the post-snap movement is. They're going to pressure off the edge a ton, and they're going to let their linebackers run to the football. They'll blitz their linebackers, Trev, but you know, I don't view them as much as and you may disagree based on the film you watch, but I don't view them as necessarily like a heavy run blitzing team. I think a lot of their linebacker pressures tend to be more passing downs in my view. I think they want to penetrate with the front. They'll do some inside stunts, so they'll maybe crash one linebacker. But you know, a lot of what they do to me is just they want to dominate with their front. But you look at like their pass rush numbers from their linebackers, like Tony Rojas has blitzed 45 times this year in 15 games. Kobe King 61, Dom DeLuca 28. Like those are similar to Notre Dame's numbers in pass rush blitzes, and their stuff is more like run stunts like Notre Dame. So in that regard, I think they use their linebackers in similar fashion as how Notre Dame uses theirs. Not quite as aggressive though. And so they're going to rely on their speed, in my opinion. So, yeah.
Yeah, you and I see it the same because personnel-wise, they're different. Their ideology of their defense, they want to be the same. They send their safeties down hard to stop the run. There's a reason why their two starting safeties in Zaquee Watley and Jalen Reed are two of the three of the team's leading tacklers, right? Jalen Reed, I think, has 92 tackles on the season, which leads the team. So he likes to come and fly downhill. He is a guy that can make plays, though, at multiple levels. Right. I mean, he does have his 92 tackles on the season, but he does also have 3 passes defended, 3 interceptions. He has a touchdown. He has a forced fumble. He has a fumble recovery. So he's a guy that likes to play, all over the field. Their defensive tackles, they don't have a Zeke Biggers. They don't have a Nazir Stackhouse. They don't have one of those guys. They're more like the CJ West, right, yeah, from Indiana. To where they're bigger guys from like a weight standpoint, but they're both like 6'1", 6'2".
And they penetrate. Know? They're more
right.
Yeah.
Right. So it's more like that. And Notre Dame is seeing more of those types of interior defensive fronts this season than the Zeke Biggers and Nazir Stackhouses. Yeah. But what they haven't faced, in my opinion, is an edge rusher as quick and as twitchy as Abdul Carter. Jalen Walker was close, but Georgia moved him all around the field. Yeah. He was coming up the middle. He was twisting around the end. He was just rushing straight off the edge. So Abdul Carter's very twitchy. You don't get 21.5 tackles for a loss in a season if you're not, right? You brought it up yesterday that sometimes it feels like he's offsides because he's in the backfield as quick as he is. And
I can't tell you how many times I've stopped the film and gone back like, hold on a second. Or I'll go to the TV copy because I'm like, let me see the TV copy because I want to see like from the sideline. And then you're like, no, he I actually do think he jumps a little bit at times, but it's not often. He's just that fast off the line.
Yeah.
But there's sometimes I'm adamant. No, there's no way. He definitely was offsides there. And you go back and you're like, no, he wasn't. He's that twitchy. And he's also real smart because he times the snaps really well.
Mm-hmm.
He has a good read on the cadence. You maybe got to find some ways to, maybe use that to an advantage in this game because he is if he thinks he has your cadence down, he's coming.
Mm-hmm.
If there's ways you can kind of maybe get him to jump, get some free yards, steal some yards, that would be obviously an ideal situation.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Brian, let's take a look at some of these numbers here in comparison from Notre Dame's offense to Penn State's defense to start giving us an idea of what this matchup is truly gonna indicate here. So, off the rip, you take a look at it. Notre Dame still has the number 4 scoring offense in the country, right? Some of those stats start to speak for themselves. And plays of 30 yards or more, they're now 49th in the country because obviously some of those numbers started to get stinted a little bit with what happened against Georgia. Notre Dame is typically a big play offense. Georgia did a good job of containing that a little bit. And then on the flip side of the coin, you take a look at Penn State's defense, which I believe has been the overall strength of this team this year. In the games where the offense has struggled a little bit, sputtered a little bit, Penn State's defense picked it up big time. And really the only game that they struggled was against Oregon, who has really good perimeter speed. And calling a spade here, that's something that they're not going to have to worry about in the Orange Bowl.
Notre Dame has some guys that I think can run on offense. Jordan Faison, Chris Mitchell can fly, but they don't use them to play fast. It's all quick game, intermediate stuff. They don't use them to stretch the field, work the seams the way that doesn't mean they may not try to do it in this game, but that hasn't been something that Notre Dame has featured a whole lot this year. And I don't know if trying to run a lot of downfield routes with Abdul Carter coming off the edge and your offensive tackles, are a little inconsistent protecting the quarterback makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. No, 100%. You go through and you take a look at what Penn State's defense has done on the year. They're 7th in points per game. They don't allow a whole lot of offensive points scored. They do a really good job of keeping everything in front of them. They don't give up a lot of big plays. They've only allowed 16 plays of 30 yards or more on the season, which ranks inside of the top 20 in the country. They do a pretty good job of taking the football away. Again, they rank inside of the top 20 in the country. Sometimes I kind of look at that and I get a little spoiled knowing what Notre Dame's defense is able to do in the takeaway game, right? But Penn State is still good at taking the football away. They're also really, really good in the red zone. And I know we're getting ready to talk about situational football here. But again, I'm going to have another article coming out this week about the battle in the hallowed grounds and the importance of winning in the red zone if you're Notre Dame. Penn State has the number 1 defense in the country in not allowing touchdowns when teams get inside of the 20-yard line. Sometimes when you see that stat with some teams, it's like, okay, they're great at not giving up touchdowns, but they'll allow field goals. They come away with some sort of points in the red zone. And Penn State's the number 4 team in the country in red zone scoring percentage. So they're really able to buckle down when teams are able to make it there. And based on their yards per game and their yards per play that they allow, teams aren't really reaching the red zone that much on them regardless.
Trev, they're 27th in the country in red zone trips allowed. They've allowed 38 red zone trips on the season. Okay. Keep in mind that they've played 15 games. So there's teams ahead of them. There's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 teams, 6 teams ahead of them that have played 12 games. And there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 15 teams ahead of them that have played 13 games. Right. So that's what I'm saying. It's like that number, to your point, is pretty good. And if you look at what they've done the last 2 games, they've allowed 8 red zone trips the last 2 games. If Notre Dame can get 4 red zone trips against Penn State, like SMU and Boise State did, I'll feel pretty good about their chances to win. Yeah. But you're going to have to be better because here's the thing, Trev, to your point. SMU and Boise scored twice in those 8 red zone trips. Twice. Not 2 touchdowns, Trev. Scored twice, and one of those was a touchdown. So you talk about stepping up when the moments are their biggest. Look, that's what they've done. A big reason why they played well against Ohio State is they allowed only 1 red zone trip, and Ohio State didn't score on that red zone trip. They only allowed 2 red zone trips from Illinois, and they only got 1 touchdown out of those. What's the biggest difference? USC got to the red zone twice, and they scored touchdowns both times. Oregon got to the red zone 5 times, and they scored touchdowns 4 times. They scored all 5 times, and 4 of those were touchdowns. That's the reason they lost that game. So getting into the red zone is going to be important, but once you get there, getting 7 is going to be the key. Oregon did that. USC did that. SMU and Boise State did not, and that's going to be a big part of it. But you know what I like about looking at their numbers, Trev, is they're just good everywhere, which – there's no spot where statistically you're like, boy, this is a problem. Like Georgia had some spots statistically where you're like, if you take advantage of this, you're going to give them some problems. And Notre Dame wasn't able to. But Notre Dame's been a pretty darn good red zone offense this year as well. We broke this down last week. A big reason why they rank 88th, if we're being honest about it, is because they went through that stretch where their field goal kicking was abysmal. That's not on the offense. I mean, they're missing 26-yard field goals, at points of time this year. And then the other one is, I think Notre Dame, if I remember correctly, I believe it's 3. They had 3 games where they took a knee in the red zone at the end of the game, which is going to factor in as well, because college football doesn't take away things like that. They'll do a team rush and take away from that. So that's an aspect of it. So Notre Dame has got a pretty darn good red zone offense. And when you look at it, Notre Dame 49th in yards per play, but it's that number 19 ranking in they're 49th in yards per game, but that number 19, 6.5 yards per play is the thing that I look at and say that's a big part of what needs to be the focal point of this matchup. Is that needs to be prominent for Notre Dame. They need to get back to having those gash plays being more of a big play offense than what they have been here in recent games, because this is, that's going to be a big part of it. Boise was able to actually do that. This is the interesting thing about that Boise State game is, Ashton Genty still had 100 yards. He needed a lot of carries to get there, but they passed for over 300 yards in that game. They actually got the ball in the red zone 4 times, which ties for the second most that they've done all season. If you look at the SMU game, first drive of the game, SMU goes right down the field. They're in the red zone. If Kevin Jennings throws a good pass on that 4th down play or just runs it for a first down, either way, that might be 7-0 SMU. Instead, he throws the ball behind the guy, gets broken up, incomplete, and now you're down. And then, Penn State goes up 14-0. Well, then SMU puts another drive together. They're down inside the 10-yard line or 15-yard line, and he throws a horrible pick where the pick that he threw near the red zone, if the guy that tips it and picks it off doesn't pick it, the safety running down to cover the slant steps in front of it, and you've got a 3rd pick 6. Like, it was a terrible decision and terrible throw. So SMU actually moved the ball on Penn State in the first half. Boise moved the ball in the first half, missed a field goal on their first possession, and just couldn't put the ball in the end zone. So you got to ask yourself, is the streak of Penn State just being that dominant in the red zone, is that going to be able to go for a 3rd straight game against a team like Notre Dame? That's going to be a big part of this matchup, Trev, because the last 3 teams. So Penn State, as I mentioned, has 38 trips into the red zone, which just ties for 27th. 13 of those trips into the red zone have come in the last 3 games. That's a third, right? That's actually 1 over a third in the last 3 games, which only make up 20% of their games. So the last 3 opponents have actually moved the ball on Penn State. They just haven't been able to put it in the end zone. That's going to be a huge key for Notre Dame, which I have a feeling you and I might talk about a little further on Wednesday, Trev.
Yeah, I have a feeling. I have a good hunch if I know anything about how you and I like to break games down. But teams have had success moving the ball on Penn State. They have, if you just watch the game, first of all, if you watch Penn State games like I know that Bryan and I have, teams have had success moving the ball on the field against Penn State, right? And against the better teams that they've played, yes, albeit they allow 288 yards per game. The final score doesn't reflect how many total yards Ohio State had against them, but they had 358 total yards in a relatively balanced game, 182 through the air, 176 on the ground. They gave up 409 total yards to USC. They gave up 469, obviously, to Oregon. But you go through and you kind of look at those numbers, and you start to take away that you are able to move the ball up and down the field on this defense, not with any sort of consistency, right? I don't want to make it sound like their stats are padded by the schedule that they played, because the way averages work, more times than not, you have to hold opponents to around 288, right, give or take. And that's what Penn State did. They did what they were supposed to those teams. They shut teams down. They didn't allow, which I know we're getting ready to talk about here, they didn't allow teams to run the ball on them effectively. They have also not faced very many mobile quarterbacks this season. They faced Kevin Jennings. They faced Will Howard. Trying to think of it. I guess Dylan Gabriel, if you want to call him a dual threat guy.
He's athletic. He can hurt you with his legs, but he's not necessarily running a bunch of designed.
Right.
I mean, Miller Moss is definitely not. Luke Altmaier is definitely not. Garrett Green a little bit again for West Virginia. That's another team that had 4 trips into the red zone. They had settled for field goals. Had to settle for field goals on 2 of those 3.
Yep.
Yeah, Washington not. I mean, the Coleman kid comes off the bench, or the Williams kid comes off the bench and runs, but he's not a mobile quarterback. Hudson Card is not. Minnesota's quarterback is not. Maryland's quarterback is not. You know, Kevin Jennings was, but he just, I mean, he just choked that game away.
Yeah, it's tough for that. It's tough for that kid. I mean, you and I talk all the time about, you know, that game is the outlier. That game was the fluke, and it's tough that you have that fluke game at that.
I lost a lot of respect for Kevin Jennings this late in the season, not just for his performance, but then this team that believed in you, that benched Preston Stone for you, then you jump in the portal so you can go grab some money. I lost a lot of respect for that kid here late in the year. A lot of respect.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And your timing is bad because you just choked away 2 games in a row. And it is what it is. I guess it's the era we live in. So but this Penn State. But here's the thing though. Penn State's defense didn't choke in those moments. They stepped up in those moments. And Notre Dame is going to have to do the same thing. And they have. I mean, like when Notre Dame got into the red zone against Indiana, they put the ball in the end zone. You know, so that's going to be a big part of this one, Trev. I mean, look, they had the drive against Georgia where you get the ball late in the half and your defense forces a turnover and a field goal there makes it 9-3. I don't feel super great about only being up 6 on Georgia in that situation. I don't know about you, Trev, but you know, you stop them and put in the end zone. So Notre Dame goes 1 of 2 in the red zone against Georgia. This is a perfect example. Actually, the number's 4 now. But how's the game end? The game ends with Notre Dame taking a knee in the red zone. So they end up going 1 of 2. So that's an example again why I say why their ranking is very misleading.
Sure.
Right, as far as like their red zone performance, but Notre Dame went 3 of 4 in the red zone against Indiana, 3 of 4 in the red zone against Southern Cal, and that was another game I believe. Didn't an Indiana game also end with Notre Dame taking a knee in the red zone? So that's you see what I'm saying? Like that's why I say their numbers are misleading.
Yeah.
6 red zone trips against Army, 6 red zone trips against Virginia, 5 against Florida State, 6 against Navy, 4 against Georgia Tech, 7 against Stanford. Last time Notre Dame had fewer than 4 trips into the red zone prior to Georgia was all the way back against Louisville. And a big reason for that was because Notre Dame hit a couple big plays in that game. They had 2 touchdowns that they scored from outside of the red zone. So that factored into it as well. So, you know, Notre Dame's been a very good team about getting into the red zone. Penn State's been a good team about keeping teams out of the red zone. Yeah, that's going to be something to look for in this game.
And for anybody that's kind of not worried, but it's a little highlighted when you look at yards per game, their defense leads the country in turnovers, right? Notre Dame's getting a good amount of short fields.
That's why I keep saying, look at the yards per play. That's the number that tells you more about the effectiveness of a team. Yards tells you about volume. Yards per play tells you about efficiency. There's a reason that Penn State, because like Penn State's offense, let's go down here, Trev, just real quick to pull that up. Penn State offense ranks 25th in the country in yards per game. They're almost identical to Notre Dame in yards per play, 6.6.
Yeah.
Right? But they've run a lot more plays this season. So that's why I say, and also if you look at the efficiency numbers, you say, okay, they're much higher than Notre Dame in offense by over 20 spots, but every efficiency number has them within 3 or 4 spots of each other, 4 to 5 spots of each other.
Sure.
In efficiency numbers, because again, the yardage is dictated by where you get the ball. And with the way Notre Dame's defense is forcing turnovers, I'll put it like this. Notre Dame has forced 31 turnovers, right? Correct?
Yes.
31 turnovers, and they've played 1 fewer game. That's 7 more than Penn State, and they've played 1 fewer game. So that plays a big part of it. Big part of it.
So next, Brian, we're going to dive more specifically. We're going to talk Notre Dame run game versus the Penn State run defense, right? And when you start looking at this is a little bit of strength on strength, right? This is, from an identity standpoint, this is what both teams want to do. Penn State wants to stop the run. Notre Dame wants to establish the ground game, and I think the numbers reflect that, right? Notre Dame ranks 11th in the country in rushing yards per game at 217 rushing yards a game. You talk about efficiency numbers. They're 6.1 yards per attempt. That's second in the country. They have 42 rushing touchdowns. That's fourth in the country. And then when you start factoring in, what triple option teams, what group of 5 teams are potentially ranked ahead of them, where like that is their offense is running a triple option, right? Those numbers are really, really impressive. And not only is it just, it's the only thing that they know how to do and they can only ground and pound, right? They're an explosive rushing offense. They have 18 runs this season of over 30 yards or more, which also ranks inside of the top 5 in the country. But they're going against a defense that has only allowed 4 runs of 30 yards or more across 15 games. That's impressive. That is really, really impressive. They don't allow a whole lot of rushing yards per game. Like I said, they've held multiple opponents to under 100 yards on the ground. Penn State as a defense ranks number 8th in the country at just a hair over 100 yards a game. And from an efficiency standpoint, they have it to match, right? They only allow 3.1 yards per attempt because there's some defenses that are matched up and paired with such a good offense that the teams that they play, right, kind of have to go away from the run pretty quickly. And those times, those numbers are reflected when you look at yards per game versus yards per attempt. But for Penn State, they match evenly, right? They're 8th in the country in both. And they've only allowed 8 rushing touchdowns this season, which ranks 3rd in the country, which obviously aligns with their red zone touchdown percentage. So when you're talking about this matchup of strength on strength, Bryan, it's going to be one of those of which strength wins the day. Is Notre Dame going to be able to find a way to establish any sort of ground game and move the line of scrimmage, something that they weren't really able to do against Georgia in the Sugar Bowl? Or is Penn State going to maintain their dominance? Ashton Jeanty did get over 100 yards. Penn State was also the first defense to hold him out of the end zone since week 3 of the season. When we're talking about somebody that has the amount of rushing touchdowns that a kid like Ashton Jeanty has, it's really, really impressive, right? The other stat that I wanted to highlight here for Penn State as well is they are really, really good at generating plays in the backfield. They're really good at creating negatives. There is some truth to, yes, they have played one more game than Notre Dame, but I don't know if that disparity of 111 tackles for loss out of that one game would make Notre Dame's stats look that much better. You know what I mean? When you compare both defenses,
they're different in how they attack. I mean, that's the thing about that. That number right there plays into what we talked about earlier. That's the biggest difference between Georgia and the Penn State. The statistic that shows the difference between the two. That's what I'm saying is whereas Penn State has played 14 games, you know who else has played 14 games? Georgia. And Georgia has 87 tackles for loss. Man. Penn State has 111. Mm-hmm. And so that's why. So the ranking there, when you look at the Notre Dame defense, the ranking actually. So like I give the raw number because I don't think people would be able to kind of. It does showing the average tackles for loss per game doesn't have the same effect, visually. But the ranking is actually the per game number. So Penn State actually ranks in tackles for loss, actually ranks 4th in volume, but they're 9th in tackles for loss per game. And if you look at Georgia, they rank 42nd in tackles for loss per game, which again shows, and Notre Dame had 0 tackles for loss allowed against Georgia. They didn't give up a single negative in the running game. Indiana is a team that desires to have more tackles for loss. They ranked 12th in tackles for loss this season. They had 10 against Notre Dame. So that's going to be a big thing is this is a team that's looking to do to you a lot like what Indiana did to you, not like what Georgia did to you.
Sure.
As far as method of attack. And that number kind of shows that. But like this is a great good on good matchup, Trev. Like I love this matchup. And here's something that's going to be very interesting about it is, when you look at the Penn State run defense, it is a lot like Indiana's in certain ways, not quite as effective. You and I were talking about this after the show when some Penn State fan was like, Indiana's run defense is nowhere near as good as Penn State's. And then we looked and saw that they have 5 common opponents and that Indiana allowed fewer yards to those 5 common opponents and their yards per attempt were identical. So if you're saying Indiana's run defense isn't that good, then you're also then saying in Penn State's run defense isn't that good because they had basically had better numbers against 5 common opponents in the same flipping conference than Indiana did. But that's a different story for a different day. They're both really good. That's the actual answer. That's the actual like non, homer answer. And then you hear Notre Dame fans, well, Penn State's run defense was really good after the 98-yard run. No, it wasn't. They didn't start getting good in run defense until after the next drive when Notre Dame went up 14-0. Because I think a lot of Notre Dame fans seem to have forgotten that the drive after the 98-yard run, Notre Dame had a 16-play drive that took over 9 minutes off the clock. If your run defense is dominant after the 98-yard drive, you're not going on a 16-play, 99-minute drive to go up 14-0. It was after that Penn State said, hey, we got to pin our ears back and we got to commit every resource to stopping the run. And after that, they did a pretty good job. And that's also about the time that Rocco Spindler got hurt. Matter of fact, it was at the end of that 9-minute drive that Rocco got hurt. And a big part of the reason the run game struggled in the second half is because Rocco was out. It's also a big reason why Charles Jagasaw has been practicing a right guard the last 2 weeks. Because if Rocco does go down, you're probably going to see Charles Jagasaw step in there as opposed to Sam Pendleton, who did not perform very well in that situation. So, no, it wasn't until after Notre Dame took I think somebody in the chat kind of said it. It was the 9-minute drive is what took Indiana's soul, not the 98-yard touchdown. And that was about Notre Dame pushing Indiana around on the line of scrimmage. Then Indiana said, hey, we're committing all our resources to stopping the run. If Penn State does that in this game, Trev, I told you these stupid wires, man.
I know.
Penn State does that in this game, it's going to be a similar – Notre Dame's going to be able to create some big plays. And that's something that we're gonna see if they're able to do that, right? And I don't know if they will, but that's going to be a key for Notre Dame. Penn State Penn State will show if they think you are a run dominant team, they will adjust accordingly. And here's an example of that, Trev. You and I broke this down. So they have at times this season put Abdul Carter in the linebacker role. They did that against Ohio State. Like second half of the game, one of the big mistakes I thought they made in the second half of that game, the second quarter and third quarter of that game, is they started playing Abdul Carter more as like a Mike linebacker in certain looks. And I thought that took away from some of the stuff he was doing off the edge. But against Boise State, one of the things they did, Trev, is when Boise would go 12 personnel, and Boise runs a lot of 12 personnel, they would actually go with 5-2 personnel. So not only did they bring in Abdul Carter and deny Dennis Sutton their starting ends, but they also put the Vanover kid, who's their number 3 end in the game, and he played inside Abdul Carter. And Abdul Carter basically turned into like a 3-4 outside linebacker, essentially, in that defense as far as where he lined up. And so when they would go 12 personnel, that's what they would do. Is they would kind of go match 5-2 and basically just said, hey, if you're going to beat us, you're going to have to beat us throwing the football. And ultimately, Boise State couldn't do it. They did hit some big plays early in the pass game, but it just wasn't enough. Now, the other thing is Notre Dame can attack you a little differently with the run game. Ashton Jeanty is a star, best running back in college football this year. But we can also say that, great vision, great power, phenomenal player. But we can also say that and say he doesn't have the home run speed that Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price had. He also didn't have a running back or a running quarterback like Riley Leonard to take the pressure off of him in the run game. That's going to have to be a key in this game because Penn State is going to look to occupy every single gap. They're going to run stunt the heck out of Notre Dame, just like Indiana did. And they're going to say, hey, basically, you're going to have to beat us with Riley Leonard and your wide receivers. That doesn't mean – because now, look, let's be honest about something, Trev. Is Penn State the first defense that's going to have ever tried that against Notre Dame?
No. No.
We know what they're going to do.
Right.
The question is, can Notre Dame do anything about it or not? That's going to be the question. They're going to commit more resources to it. Don't be shocked if they have Dom DeLuca in to start the game as opposed to their nickels. They'll definitely do that when Notre Dame goes 12 personnel. So if Notre Dame starts the game at 12 personnel, and Indiana did this too. Indiana went with different personnel. They went 4-3 personnel on the first couple plays of the game as well against Notre Dame. You're going to see the same thing from Penn State.
So we're talking a little bit, Bryan, about what we believe that Penn State is going to do on defense based on what they've done against other opponents this year and what every single opponent has done against Notre Dame this year. Ideas to stop the run, make Riley Leonard throw, yada, yada, yada. We've seen this before. We've been here before, right? But let's kind of get into the keys to the run game success from Notre Dame's standpoint, right? Because like I said at the start of the show, Notre Dame left a lot to be desired against Georgia.
Yep.
And they had a lot of opportunities there where they were this close to making some plays into longer plays. And we were talking before the show, it's not like those 2-yard gains should have been 35-yard gains, but those 2-yard gains could have been 6-yard gains, 7-yard gains, right? And when you start to add all those up over the course of a game, the outcome starts to look a little bit different. And I'm not upset about the outcome anyways. You know what I mean? But from your perspective, Bryan, the things that you have seen, what does Notre Dame need to do on Thursday to have success in the run game?
Well, a big thing is you have to be more physical, come off the line with more physicality. You know, Trev, you talk about what you were just talking about. I did a run breakdown, and we were kind of we were discussing that before the show started. And one of the big issues I had is we saw it a little bit in the second half against Indiana, but I wasn't as concerned about it because, honestly, it was one of those things where, okay, game's over. They're up 17-3. And your starting right guard's out. You know, your starting running back's been banged up a little bit. It's just, hey, we've won this game. Let's not do anything to screw it up. And if they go up 17-3 against Penn State at halftime, they'll do the same thing the second half against Penn State and just say, we trust our defense, so they're not going to give up, 3 scores. And so when you look at it, it really comes down to get back to playing how you did in the regular season. Like the one thing we praise this Notre Dame offensive line about for all season is even when they didn't play well, they played hard and they were physical. They battled against Georgia and Indiana, but what we saw a lot more of in those 2 games, and this is what my breakdown was focused on, they reverted back to some really ugly 2023 habits. Some really ugly 2023 habits. And that is they started catching a lot against Georgia instead of firing off and attacking the run. If they catch against Penn State, they will give up a lot of tackles for loss and the run game will struggle. They may crease a couple because that's what they do, but they're going to really – and they did that against Georgia as well. Riley Leonard rips off a 30-plus yard run. That's another 30-plus yard run for this run game. Jadarian Price rips off a big run that got called back from a hold that would not have stopped the run. If he doesn't hold that guy, it's not like all of a sudden he doesn't rip off a 20-something yard run. They will get theirs, but they didn't get enough of theirs. So, like, when in my breakdown, one thing I went through is I charted every run play in this game. And one of the things that I had is Notre Dame basically had 31 designed runs in the game. As far as like, just 31 designed runs in the game. And of those 31 designed runs, 17 of them gained 3 yards or less. And fortunately, there were no negatives in that game. But the point, Trevor, behind it is you're in a situation where Penn State will turn some of those 1s and 2s into minuses the way that they play. Because they're looking like Georgia wants to stone you for 0 to 2 yards every time you're on the football. That's just who they are. That's what they've always been. Georgia's never been a great rack up 1 million tackles for loss defense. Even in 21 and 22, they weren't a great rack up 1 million tackles for loss defense. That's not who they are. They're going to stone you at the line of scrimmage, and they're just going to dominate you at the point of attack. That's who Georgia has been for a long time. And not that they can't create negatives, but they've never been a team that was phenomenal at. In 2022, Georgia ranked 58th in tackles for loss. That was their second championship season. Their first championship season where they were special dominant, they were 37th in tackles for loss. This is a team that gave up 70-something yards rushing in both seasons, and they never ranked in the top 35 in tackles for loss. Completely different type of style of play. Penn State's looking to create those negatives. If you catch a lot in this game, that's going to happen. If they get back to coming off with some force and getting a push, then you're going to have some wins by Penn State, some wins by Notre Dame. But I think overall, that's when you can start to lean a little bit on this defense because that's where I think the size can become a factor and all those other type of things.
Yeah, end of the day for me, offensive line play has to be improved, right? All encompassing, because there were some things, like you said, that were uncharacteristic that Notre Dame was doing at the tail end of the season the things that they were doing really well were just not experienced. They were not doing against Georgia. They weren't driving their legs. They weren't, and so it leaves a lot of question marks around the offensive line. But it all goes back to talking about the differences from a personnel standpoint between Penn State and between Georgia. Georgia has the guys that they're meant to stonewall. They don't penetrate too much, right? They're holding you to those gains. Penn State is the more athletic defense. They're the quicker defense at certain positions, right? Like I would say more along the defensive line, they're a little bit quicker. I'm very high on Georgia's linebackers. I think they're very fast. They have really good sideline to sideline. They move really well. Not that Penn State's don't, but once we get to this level of football, we're kind of comparing, elite versus elite, great versus great, right? So, but no, I'm with you. Offensive line play absolutely has to step up. And another thing as well is I think there needs to be better scheme involved in there as well. I think Notre Dame in the second half of the Georgia game had a really good emphasis on trying to get the ball to the perimeter. They were doing different jet sweeps and jet motions, and Jadarian Price was able to bounce a couple of counter plays after Jay Love went down. But from a schematic standpoint, Mike Denbrock is going to have to do another good job of being able to get his players out in space. Because again, this is, and I said this last week, and I'm going to say it this week, and if Notre Dame is able to make it into the national championship, I will say it again. Once defenses start to see taillights from these running backs,
right,
people don't catch them, right? And so Mike Denbrock is going to have to do a good job of doing things, mixing it up, right? It can't just be all outside. It can't just be all inside. It can't be all pin and pull. It can't be all counter. You have to mix things that he's done all season. But from a schematic standpoint, Notre Dame is also going to have to perform really well against a really good Penn State front. So that's another key for me.
Another thing, big thing, Trev, is the way that Notre Dame goes about attacking Penn State is going to have to be like some of the stuff that you saw work. Some people are asking, hey, I want to see more of those jet sweeps and reverses and stuff against Penn State. And I have no problem running that. I like jet sweeps. I think that's a part of what Notre Dame should do. I think that's great for play action, all that. But the reason they did a lot of that against Georgia is exactly why you and I said they should run that play going into the Georgia game, is because the way Georgia plays, they're vulnerable to that type of stuff. Penn State is a much better team at pursuing that stuff. They actually have a pretty decent amount of speed on the back end of their defense at linebacker and safety. And their defense is geared. That's why their safeties are first and third in tackles, because they play the alleys to defend that stuff pretty well. Jalen Kimber and A.J. Harris both have good size at corner, so they're pretty good at kind of being good force players where they're going to funnel that stuff back inside. And so I don't know that those things will be quite as effective with the volume that they did it against Penn State. But I would use that stuff as looks to kind of get the eye discipline going. And if Penn State doesn't respect it, then you can get to it. But this is still going to come down to, you got to be good in your inside zone. You got to be good with your counter concepts. You've got to be able to get a push in their run game. I don't know that outside zone was a play that was going to work great against Georgia. So they didn't really, I don't think they ran it but once or twice the entire game. Against Penn State, you're going to see more of that come back. Outside zone is what the 98-yard touchdown run was against Indiana. It's what the 20-plus yard run that Jadarian Price had against Indiana. We're both on that. And so you're going to see more of that. I think counter could be a big piece of it. But the other thing is what Penn State or what Ohio State did a pretty good job of, and what I thought USC did a pretty good job of, is they both, like USC did a really nice job of their stretch stuff against Penn State. But what Ohio State did, which I think Notre Dame should try to take advantage of, is they use formations to get Penn State to go corners over, and then they just would quick pitch it outside. Just go right at that end, quick pitch it outside, and then you've got nobody out there. They gashed them twice on that type of play. So the point is, you're going to have some creativity. You don't just reproduce what Ohio State did, right? But you have to have some creativity to try to create gash plays and slow down their charge. If you don't do anything to kind of slow down their charge, then they're just going to keep doing what Indiana and Georgia did. Notre Dame did a really nice job in the second half against Georgia of doing things to slow down their charge, which helped them on that icing the game drive. It also helped them on the drive where they got the field goal to put them back up 13. Against Indiana, they did not. And so against Penn State, you're going to need another good plan to kind of keep Penn State from just pinning their ears back and just attacking the inside zone. And we'll see if they do that. Like, I don't know that quarterback runs, are necessarily the answer in a traditional read zone stuff, but there's definitely some quarterback run stuff that you can do in this game to be effective. And I would like to see them do. There was actually one snap where they went 21 personnel in that game against Georgia, Trev. I would not be upset if we see a little bit more of that. Would not be upset at all if we see a little bit more of that.
No, you and me both, man. Well, hey, listen, guys, we're getting ready to dive into the Notre Dame pass game versus the Penn State's pass defense, and then we're going to talk a little bit of game wreckers. But before we do, you guys know the drill, right? Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family. And as always, the best way to support what we do here at Irish Breakdown is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com.
Before we get into the pass game, Trev, I did want to make one. I wanted to build on one comment you said that also builds on a comment that Stephen B made in the chat.
Yeah.
Getting the ball in space and onto the second level is huge against Penn State because they are a team that will miss a lot of tackles. And if you look at the numbers, Penn State this season compared to Notre Dame's defense this season in 14 games has missed a total of 110 tackles. They have 2 players that are over 10. It's their 2 safeties. If you look at Penn State this season, they have 8 players that have more than 10. And they have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those guys have a miss percentage over 20%. Adon Schuler is the only Notre Dame starting player with an over 20% missed tackle rate. Xavier Watts is at 14, Osbury's at 14, Jordan Clark's at 16, Jalen Sneed's at 13, Leonard Moore's at 11, Drake Bowen is at 7, which is really good. Burnham's at 17, Christian Gray's at 14, Benjamin, don't know about him. Let's see here. Heinisch is at 11. Jack Kaiser's a 3.5% miss rate. That's the number of misses per snaps played. Rod Hurd's 8.8. Let's see here. Bryce Young's only missed 1. Gabriel Rubio's 5.3%. Howard Cross only has 1 registered missed tackle all season on defense. And there's a couple guys that are in the rotation that don't have any on the season. So Notre Dame has been a much better tackling team. Penn State, Rojas is over 20. Zakee Watley's at 18.8. Zion Tracy, who's their nickel, is 38. One of their nickels, 38.2. Zane Durant's at 23%. Dom DeLuca's at 26%. Amin Vanover's at 41%. Devon J. Thomas, their D tackle, is at 19%. Denai Dennis Sutton's at 23%. They miss a lot of tackles. Even Colby King, their middle linebacker, is 11. If you added Jack Kaiser and Drake Bowen together, they don't have as many missed tackles as Colby King, who is the most sure tackler Penn State has. Now, part of that is their aggressiveness leads for them missing tackles in the backfield, and then somebody else tackles them at the line of scrimmage. So part of their high numbers is a little bit inflated by that. So because their aggressiveness, the D tackle missed a tackle for loss 4 yards in the backfield, and then somebody else tackles a guy at -2. You know what I mean?
Right.
But you can get them in space, and that's where you have to take advantage. And they have not faced a lot of really dynamic running backs this year. Even Ohio State, Travion Henderson is a dynamic back, but they didn't feature him a ton in that game. But what's the one team, Trev, looking at their schedule, what's the one team that when you watch them play, had pretty explosive running backs that Penn State had to defend this year? I think you know where I'm going with this. Do you remember who that team was?
Off the top of my head, I'd say USC.
USC. And they gashed Penn State. Joyner had a 70-something yard touchdown run in that game because he made somebody miss. And so that's one where you look at and say, okay, that's the team that's built more like Notre Dame from an athleticism standpoint in the backfield, and they were able to have much more success than a team like Ohio State who's trying to run right at you. And all of Ohio State's big plays in that game were gash plays. So Quentin Joyner had 82 yards on 3 carries. He had a 75-yard touchdown run. But Woody Marks went for $111 on 20. And that played a big role in that game as well. So that's going to be a very interesting, very interesting. So Stephen B., you didn't spoil it. That was a reminder for me to talk about it. So you're good, man. This is why I wish you guys would stay on point more, because sometimes you guys bring up great points that then we can bring into the show and point it out. So that was a really good point, Stephen, and we did not talk about it. I had my chance to build on it from what Trevor said, but I didn't. But it reminded me that it's something I should talk about. So it was a very good observation, and that's why I wanted to bring that up. But I wanted to get to that before we got into the pass game, Trev.
Yeah, absolutely. Good call out, Stephen B. Good call out. Now, Bryan, switching over now to the pass game, and this one is going to be a little bit more of the interesting matchup. Similar conversation to what we had last week around something's got to give. This isn't the Penn State secondary that people are used to saying. Jalen Reed is a really nice player, but they don't have that, like at corner, they don't have that Joey Porter Jr., right? Like they don't have, I like Jalen Reed, but he's not like Jaquan Brisker. You know what I mean?
He's more of a run defender first. He's not Malachi Starks. He's not,
Right. And so this one's going to be interesting, right? Especially given what Notre Dame's passing performance looked like against Georgia. And there's a lot of reasons for it. And I know we're going to talk about what that's going to look like throughout the rest of the week leading up to the game. But from a statistical matchup, you kind of look and you see the numbers right there for Notre Dame, right? Passing yards per game, they rank outside of the top 100 in the country at 109th. Yards per attempt, they're 92. Yards per completion, they're at 126 at 10.5. Completion percentage, they are at 15th. They have 21 passing touchdowns on the season. They do a really good job of taking care of the football. They have 21 touchdown passes to their 6 interceptions on the season, and their 6 interceptions ranks number 6 in the country. So again, I don't want to confuse it and make it sound like Notre Dame is some triple option team that never throws the football, and that's why they only have 6 interceptions. I mean, routinely Riley Leonard finishes with well into the 20s in passing attempts per game.
He's had several games over 30. Yeah.
Right. And so it's not something where they throw the ball 9 times and he's been picked off 6 times this season. Right. Mm-hmm. From an efficiency number standpoint, they're 50th in the country. From an explosive perspective, Notre Dame is not an explosive pass offense. They have 9 passing plays of 30 yards or more this season, which ranks 130th out of 134, I believe, in the country.
Yeah, and outside of one play against Indiana, that has also been true in the postseason.
Yep, 100%. And then you go through and you look at what Penn State's been able to do on pass defense. And in comparison to their run defense numbers, this is the facet of their defense that also kind of lapses a little bit, right? They allow 187.9 yards per game, which is almost on par with how many passing yards Notre Dame gets per game, right? But that ranks them 27th in the country. Yards per attempt, they're at 19th in the country at 6.3. They allow a good amount of completions. I mean, in comparison to some other defenses in the country, they rank about 51st.
They do a lot of, we're going to let you catch it at 4 and rally to the football.
Sure.
You know, they're going to let you catch the little quick outs. They're going to let you catch some hitches. They're going to let you catch, some crossers, and then they just fly to the football and blow it up. So they're in that way, they remind me a little bit of Notre Dame's defense 2 years ago under Al Golden, where Notre Dame gave up about a 59% completion rate because they were just giving up a lot of the quick game stuff. And then as they got more into being more aggressive, the percentage went up. But that's a reason for that, Trev.
Yeah.
Why the completion percentage doesn't necessarily match a lot of the other numbers is because of that.
Which makes sense because you look at what the yards they give up per game and per attempt, right? So you're willing to give up that 2-yard gain. Absolutely. From a pass efficiency defensive standpoint, they rank 25th in the country. They keep everything in front of them, right? Again, they don't allow a lot of explosive plays. Having 12 passing plays of 30 yards or more on a season after they've already played 15 games is really impressive. So that puts them at 20th in the country. The sack number I thought was a little interesting with how active they are in tackles for loss and how good Abdul Carter is at getting after the quarterback. After 15 games, they have 39 sacks, which ranks 33rd in the country. Not that that's bad. I don't want to say that that's bad. It's just I expected that number to be a little higher based on what they do or based on the personnel that they have coming off of the edge, right? So from a bird's eye view perspective, that's kind of the statistical matchup of these two sides of the ball.
What's interesting is most of their sacks are made by 2 guys. So 17.5 of their sacks were made by Abdul Carter and Denai Dennis Sutton. Abdul Carter has 11, Denai Dennis Sutton has 6.5. Their next highest guy is their rotation end, Amin Vanover, who actually started against Penn State in a 3 defensive end look. He's got 3.5. Then it's 3, 3, 2.5, 1.5, 1.5, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, half. So to your point, they're not quite as good at getting to the let's just say good. They're not quite as like last year, for example, they had 49 sacks in 13 games. They were at 3.77 per game. That was the nature of their defensive system last season under Manny Diaz. It was more geared towards that. But I also don't know that this defense is, maybe quite as good at some of that, to be honest with you. I mean, but they're also, I think, willing to say, hey, listen, the reason that their yard, if you're looking at it from the Penn State standpoint, the reason our yards are allowed are so low is because we're not unnecessarily aggressive, right? Like, so we're willing to allow our defensive line to eat you up by itself and not have to rely on it as much to, the pressures and the scheme and stuff like that. Tom Allen's willing to say, hey, listen, if my front four is eating you up, then I'm going to allow my front four to eat you up and not bring a million pressures to get at you. And he'll have some well-designed, corner fires, and he'll bring the safeties on blitzes and things like that. Like, he's a good football coach. I'm actually complimenting him here by saying he doesn't do things he doesn't have to do just to prove to everyone how smart he is. He trusts his players and says, hey, we're going to keep everything in front of us a lot and allow them to rally to the football. And I think that factors a little bit into why their sack numbers are maybe down a little bit from where they have been in past seasons. I don't know that it's necessarily an overall lack of effectiveness as much as I don't know that pure sacks is as much of a goal as the other thing. And I think the other thing too is that they've got 18 interceptions this year. They had 12 and 14 the 2 previous years, 14 the year before that, 4 the year before that, 10 the year before that. I think part of these pressures are designed to create like Notre Dame. Notre Dame, Al Golden has always said, yeah, sacks are great, but like sacks are not always the goal of the pressures we're bringing. Because what would you rather have, a sack or a pick?
Sure.
Right? It's a pick, and I think that's also a little bit of the philosophy that Penn State has on defense with their pass defense. Now, I do think their pass defense is very good statistically, but I do believe also that can be the vulnerable part of this team. And we talked about that going into the Oregon game. I said, this is why I think Oregon is going to win and why I think it could end up being a blowout. What I got wrong in that evaluation is I gave Oregon's defense way too much credit.
Same.
For how it had performed against a Big Ten that, let's be honest, right? We can say, look, there's a reason the Big Ten has 2 teams in the Final Four, right? It's a very good league. Okay, so Big Ten fans, don't get in your feelings about this. It's a very good league. But let's be honest, there's not a lot of great offenses in that league outside of the top 4. And they didn't all play each other. There are 4 teams in the Big Ten this year that average less than 20 points per game. And there are 9 teams in the Big Ten that average less than 24 points per game. Only 5 Big Ten teams scored over 30 points a game. There's 18 teams in that league. So there's not a lot of great offenses in that league, and there's not a lot of great passing offenses in that league either. And there just weren't a lot of teams that had the ability, if we're being honest, to exploit Penn State's pass defense. But we don't know that Notre Dame's does. That's going to be the part of this matchup that's very intriguing. Is I say all that generally speaking, but if you look at the Notre Dame numbers, Notre Dame's pretty good in passer rating, especially Riley Leonard's passer rating since the bye. He's in the 150s since the bye, including the playoff games. But completion percentage is high, yards per attempt is super, super low, which means Notre Dame is playing right into Penn State's hands. They're going to throw a lot of that quick game stuff, which is also results in some of their interceptions, because they'll get you thinking, and this is what I like about their defense. They did this to Ohio State. They do a lot of off coverage, rally to the football. Their corners will play tight, and then at the snap, they'll kind of open and run as like a cover 3 type look or an off man type look, and then they'll drive to the football. Hey, we'll let you catch a 6-yard hitch on 3rd and 10, but we're going to rally to the ball and tackle you and bring you down. But they also will try to bait you. And you look at that first play against Ohio, the first pick against Ohio State, they're trying to bait Ohio State into throwing out. I mean, that was a great defensive call. They baited Ohio State into throwing that slant route, and the linebacker read it perfectly, picks it off and takes it back to the house. So those are the things you talk about. Is their pressures are, in my opinion, are more designed to fluster the quarterback and result in bigger disruptions than just sacks. And that's what happened to SMU, and that's what happened to Ohio State early in that game, and that's what has led to them being a very high turnover team. Does Notre Dame have the ability to exploit that enough in this game? Notre Dame doesn't have to throw for 300 yards to beat Penn State, but if they throw for over 200 and it's not because they're behind big early, then you start feeling pretty good about Notre Dame's chances to win this football game, or if they could just get close to 200. But can they do that, right? Can Jordan Faison build on what he did against Georgia? Can they finally get the tight ends going in this football game? Can somebody else step up? Can they finally, hey, let's actually maybe give our slots a chance to make some more plays? There's a lot of what ifs, and that's the biggest what if of this game. And the biggest question mark of this game is the Notre Dame pass offense against the Penn State pass defense. That, to me, could ultimately determine the outcome of this game. Because, sure, Notre Dame could win 20-17 again, but you don't have to do that. There's no rule saying you can't be aggressive offensively and try to score a lot more points.
Right.
We'll see if they can, because Penn State has not really allowed that to happen this season outside of 2 games, really. I mean, it really comes down to who are the 2 teams that really move the ball well on them. It was USC and it was Oregon. That's really it. Consistently moving the ball against them.
So let's kind of dive into the keys to a successful passing game, right? You've mentioned that this could potentially be the key that kind of takes Notre Dame over the top and gives them the best opportunity, increases even more so like what we believe to be their chances to win this football game, right? So what do we got to see from this Notre Dame passing attack from top to bottom?
Easiest one, number 1, Trev, protect the quarterback. I mean, that's numero uno. That was a big problem that they had against Georgia. It's a big problem they had against Indiana. Your 2 playoff games, your offensive line has not played well. Just has not played well. And that's a big – you can talk about all these receivers, this, and Trev, you and I have watched all 22. There were guys open against Georgia. Not a ton, but enough to where you could have had 150, 160 passing yards at least. Just the ball never came. Indiana, we looked at this as well. There was opportunities there in the pass game, but half the time Riley Leonard's getting pressured before he even finishes his drop. That's a big, big part of this, man. If the offensive line doesn't play better, if Anthony Knapp doesn't play better, if Emil Wagner doesn't play better, if the interior guys don't play better, it really won't matter a whole lot what the receivers do, because Riley Leonard won't have the time to get it out, and Mike Denbrock won't have the ability to call some of the plays that give you some opportunities to make more plays down the field. So, those are big parts of it. And there's a question in there. Somebody asked me, is Greathouse taking a step back this year? Has he just been lost in the scheme a bit? He doesn't seem to be running as hard this year. He's rarely allowed to run routes more than 5 yards. That's a big part of it. He's running slants and hitches and options the whole stinking game. Those are not routes where you're meant to run fast, because that's what the offense has to do, because the pass protection has not always been there. We've said this before, Trevor. One of the most misleading numbers about Notre Dame's offense this year is their low sacks allowed number. Because Riley Leonard, just off the top of my head, I could name you 11 or 12 sacks off the top of my head that probably would have happened if any other Notre Dame quarterback is on the field. And this isn't a Steve Angeli shot. Any other Notre Dame quarterback is on the field. If you're a Kenny guy, I'm talking about Kenny. If you're a CJ guy, I'm talking about CJ. If you're a Steve guy, I'm talking about Steve. If anyone other than Riley Leonard is not your starting quarterback this year, you're probably looking at those numbers, Trev. You're probably in around 30, if not more, in sacks allowed this season. I mean, and that's been an issue all season. And Penn State will make you pay for that if you don't improve. And part of that's going to be guys are going to have to play better. The other part of that is Mike Denbrock's going to have to do some things schematically early to try to create some max pro situations. This is why I say the biggest missed opportunity that Notre Dame has had in the pass game this year is the lack of play action pass, which A, slows down the pass rush a bit naturally. B, creates some kind of quick pop pass type situations, running like Ohio State had a couple of those where they fake a run and then just boom, hit a crosser behind the linebackers. But then also it gives you chances to max pro and get one-on-one downfield opportunities. I think that's one of the biggest missed opportunities that we've seen from this offense this year, is not having more of a I don't want to say extensive because you need to run like 12 play actions a game, but more than they've done, several more than they've done. And that's something that I want to see. And you got it. You need to see that. Honestly, that is the biggest key, and there's no close second. Honestly, there's no close second. If Riley Leonard doesn't get time to throw, they will look just like they did throwing the ball the last 2 weeks. If he gets time to throw, they'll be able to make some plays in the pass game. It's as simple as that. It really is. It really is.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that Notre Dame had receivers open early. You know, they had receivers that were open downfield. They just weren't able to get them the ball. And I will say some of it, especially after going through and looking at the film, Riley Leonard needs to slow down a little bit. That would be my number 2 is like slow down. Don't move off of your reads too quickly. But that is a direct correlation with why do quarterbacks speed through their reads in the 14th game of the season? It's because he's not going to get enough time to pass, right? When people are getting driven back into your lap in quick game, to scan the field the way that you need to, like that you have to in any given play call, you have to speed through your reads or else somebody might come open late or whatever. But in this offense, there is no coming open late because there's not going to be enough time. By the time that receivers are hitting the top of their route, Riley Leonard's having to do some sort of gap escape, right? Now, one thing that I did notice, and this wasn't a key that we wrote down, but it's Notre Dame's receivers, if there is an area of improvement, in my opinion, after watching the All-22, they need to do a better job of finding ways to get open when Riley Leonard is scrambling out of the pocket. There are times where he is looking downfield, and the second he breaks out of the pocket, I think receivers just assume that he's going to run.
Yeah.
And I see start blocking, or I've even seen some of them just completely stop. You know, it's been few far in between, but they immediately turn to start blocking, which there's some truth to that because, I mean, you don't get 80 rushing yards in a game without, tucking and running. I understand that. But there are times where Riley Leonard is looking to push the ball down the field and routes immediately stop. Nobody works back to the football. Nobody, so that is another key. If Riley Leonard does have to break outside of the pocket, it's going to have to get better too.
He has to be one of the things that I'll give you a little preview of. One of our keys to victory is Mike Denbrock is going to have to figure out how to get Riley Leonard comfortable early.
Yes.
Trevor, early in that Georgia game, he was very mentally uncomfortable with his reads. First play of the game, the ball that got batted, if he looks to the left, and we broke this down the other night, he's got Chris Mitchell wide open for a minimum 8 to 9 yard gain. And instead it's a tip pass. He catches it, throws it again, which tells you where he was mentally to start that game. I mean, again, Riley was my player of the game, and he made a lot of great plays. But pass game-wise, he was not feeling it against Georgia. He really wasn't. He had a couple nice throws. The read on the slant to Jordan Faison was good, a couple out cuts, but he was not comfortable reading the defense early in that game and missed some opportunities for more yards. They're going to have to say, okay, what can we do early in this game to get him comfortable with what he's seeing, to get him some nice, easy reads, some nice, easy throws, to maybe take a couple shots and get him feeling good early. That's going to be a big key to this one. And of course, Penn State's going to say, well, what can we do to make him not comfortable early? That's going to be their answer. So, and then at the end of the day, Trev, before we move on to the defense, end of the day, somebody's got to step up and make plays in the pass game. When you get those opportunities to go make plays, do it. And that's the one thing I'll give the receivers a ton of credit for against Georgia. Every time that they had an opportunity to make a play, they made a play.
Yeah.
And that's going to have to continue against Penn State.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we move on to the defense, did you want to cover game records or move over to the defense?
Yeah, we'll cover those a little bit tomorrow.
Okay.
Because we're gonna.
Yep. Totally. Well, guys, we're about to cover the defensive side of the ball here. But of course, before we do, be sure to hit that like button, the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and share this podcast with your friends and family. And the best way to support what we do here at Irish Breakdown is subscribe to the premium message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, Brian, let's dive into the Notre Dame defense, the side of the football that was highlighted in the All-State Sugar Bowl, the side of the ball that essentially won Notre Dame this game, held Georgia to 10 points, forced 2 turnovers, and shined really for outside of one drive 58 minutes of game time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So looking at the importance of this matchup as a whole, both of these units, like some of the Penn State fans have alluded to in this chat, like both sides of this ball here, Notre Dame's defense, Penn State's offense, they're both playing some of the best football that they've played this season, Bryan.
This has just been a really outstanding unit, Trevor. And there was a lot of Notre Dame fans that picked Notre Dame to lose against Georgia or potentially could struggle, where it was all about, I think the Riley Mills injury is the final straw. Well, that may still be true. Just because it didn't happen against Georgia doesn't mean at some point in time that may not be the thing. But the fact that it wasn't, and that they dominated Georgia in the trenches despite not having Riley Mills or Boubacar Traore or Jordan Pataho or Jason Onye is just a testament to how talented this team is, but also the mindset this team has. I mean, goodness gracious, if you think about who's had a rough 2024 as a coach for Notre Dame, I mean, if you're out Washington, you're like, seriously, what did I do to deserve this? All my guys going down for different reasons, but you know what doesn't change week after week after week? The production. It just finds different answers. We needed to see Gabriel Rubio step up for Notre Dame, and he did. We needed to see Donovan Heinisch step up for Notre Dame, and he did. Howard Cross didn't actually play dominant football. I think he had like a couple tackles, no tackles for loss, no pressures, but he did his job really well. He just didn't do the sexy plays we're used to. But as I said, upon further review, his ability to control gaps is a big reason why there was nowhere for Georgia to go. Because sometimes a D tackle doing his job in dominant fashion is not him making a play; it's him making sure you've got nowhere to go. And we talked about that. Georgia's D line racked up a grand total of 0 tackles for loss in the run game. Doesn't mean they didn't dominate Notre Dame's offensive line. It's just they didn't end up with tackles for loss. And so that to me was a big aspect of it. Trev was Notre Dame's ability to do that is just speaks volumes about the kind of defense this team has. It just doesn't. Benjamin, All-American corner goes down. All right, cool. Leonard Moore steps in and thrives. You lose Jordan Patelho, Boubacar steps in and he thrives. He gets hurt then, and then what happens? Junior Talimaka and Josh Burnham handle that position just fine. And it's just been that way all year. And you hope that they can continue that, because if Notre Dame's going to win a championship, let's be honest, this side of the ball is going to have to keep playing elite defense. It just is. Are they capable of doing that against a Penn State team that's a pretty a solid offense? It's not a great offense, but it's a dangerous offense. It's a good offense. If you don't have a good plan, they'll do some things to create some big play opportunities to their tight end and their 2 running backs that you got to be prepared for. They've got a pretty good-sized offensive line. They can lean on you if you're not prepared for it. And those are all things that Notre Dame is going to have to be prepared for against a Penn State offense that does present some interesting challenges. And they've got a quarterback that still has a lot of development that's needed, Trevor. And you can see the numbers there. But they also have a quarterback who has as much arm talent as just about any quarterback in the country. He's just not necessarily there in the development standpoint yet. But when he's on, he's pretty good. You see it there, Trev. They rank in the top 25 in scoring and total yards. They're ranked 10th in yards per play. They're a top 30 offense in both red zone categories, or they're the number 15 third down offense in the country. They're not super explosive either. They rank 57th in the country with 26 plays of 30 yards or more. And they do a decent job, but not a great job of protecting the football. And I say that because their numbers overall aren't bad when it comes to turning the ball over, but they have turned the ball over in some key moments. And at time, like, so they had 2 turnovers against Oregon. They had 3 against USC. That played a big role in them being down early. They have had their moments where turning the ball over has been a concern for them. And Notre Dame's going to have to take advantage of that. But, we'll see. They've turned the ball over at least once in their last 4 games. The thing that's helped them in the 2 playoff games is they forced 7 turnovers. Now, Notre Dame obviously doesn't turn the ball over a ton either, but that's going to be a big part of it. But this is a good quality offense, Trevor. And if you don't play well against them, they can hurt you. They're not the same high octane offense that Ohio State necessarily is, or that Oregon is, but they're a lot, or even that Indiana was, to be honest with you. But they're more dynamic than Indiana is. There's nobody at Indiana that's as good as Tyler Warren. with all due respect to the backs in Indiana, who you and I both like, they're not Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton. They're just not. And Amari Evans is a young guy that's still learning, but he can fly. So that's what makes this team dangerous, Trevor. They can be had, which we have seen. They scored 0 offensive touchdowns against Ohio State. There's been other games this year. Minnesota did a good job of keeping them in check this season. Wisconsin did a good job of keeping them in check this season. I mean, if you look at the stretch from Illinois to Ohio State, a stretch of 5 games, they only scored over 30 points once, and they needed overtime, to get to that number. So, that's the thing. You look at it is this offense is rolling right now. Is that indicative of more of the defenses they've played and offenses they've played given a bunch of turnovers, or has their defense kind of finally found some answers? That's what we're going to find out in this game. But this is a good match. This is going to be a good test for this Notre Dame defense. But it also is one, Trev, if we're being honest, if Notre Dame just keeps doing what they're doing, Penn State won't score a lot of points. It may be enough to win because I'm, 17 to 24 points. They won't get much more than that. But that may be enough to win if the Notre Dame offense can't play better.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I've really liked about Penn State's offense is they're extremely balanced, right? Like, I will say there was this perception about Indiana, to your point, that they were an air-it-out team and they're going to throw on you for 500 yards a game. But what makes Indiana's offense truly dangerous is because they were a balanced offense. It's the same thing with Penn State's, but they're balanced in different ways, right? Andy Nittany finds different ways to hurt you. I mean, they're lining up Tyler Warren in the Wildcat. How many tight ends in college football have 4 rushing touchdowns? You know what I mean?
The job they do moving him around and making sure you as a defense don't know where he's going to be is as good as anything that you're going to see. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's talking about Wildcat, Trevor. Let's look at the numbers. Like, I do this thing in the opponent preview every game. And they lost Bo Prabula, but I'll be honest with you, I think that's the best thing to happen to that offense. Yeah, this season. I know he put up good numbers. That there were so many times I felt they forced him into the game that it would throw off the rhythm of what they were doing. Wisconsin game was a little bit like that. We're like, dude, they're forcing the issue here with that kid because they're trying to keep him happy. But I just feel like they're not doing it. But like Tyler Warren has 24 carries for 197 yards this season, Trevor, and 4 rushing touchdowns. That would be their 6'6", 260-pound tight end. Like, you're like, come on. It's like against Purdue, he had 3 carries for 63 yards. Ohio State, he had 3 for 47 against Ohio State.
He was their leading rusher against Ohio State. Yeah. I mean, like Tyler Warren's the real deal, man. Like, look, this matchup's going to be fun, and I'm with you. If Notre Dame plays their game and they play like they have been literally all season outside of the one outlier game against USC, Penn State's going to have trouble scoring points. But I will always give credit where credit is due and tip my hat when it's warranted. No pun intended. And Tyler Warren is the real deal. He is oh man, he's so good.
I think two things that have helped them look better in the postseason, Trevor, in my opinion, and I'm curious what you think about this. I think, as I said, one of them I do believe is not trying to force Bo Prabula into the game. I think that's a big part of it. Like I said, I really felt like that just kind of it started to force the issue a little bit, in my opinion. But the other part of it too is Andy Nittany is a very creative offensive mind, but I think at times he outthinks himself. Yeah, he outsmarts himself, and I've seen less of that down the stretch. A little bit less of that down the stretch. They're still going to show that that's who he is. But I think that's part of it as well. Is you're seeing less of because the drive would be going, and then he'd pull some weird shift, and then all of a sudden they lose 4, and you're like, bro, you're trying way too hard there. It's like you're not at Kansas anymore. You're at Penn State now. You've got Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen and Drew Aller and Tyler Warren and Harrison Wallace and Julian Fleming. You don't gotta reinvent the wheel every other play to move the football, right? And I think that's something that's helped them a little bit as well. Again, they haven't been like this lights out, light the world on fire offense. I mean, when you look at the SMU game. Boy, they scored 38 points on that SMU defense that you guys said is pretty good. Yeah, their offense isn't the reason they scored 38 points on that defense. They literally had 2 defensive touchdowns, and their offense only averaged 5 yards a play. Like the 325 yards don't bother me. It's the 5 yards a play. Yeah. Because they didn't have as many possessions because of all the turnovers. Right. in the pick sixes. So that's going to, every time they run it back, you're going to have one less possession opportunity.
Yeah.
But, they still made those plays, but their offense has been a lot like Notre Dame's the last couple of games in the playoff. Is they're doing what they need to do.
Yeah.
They're doing what they need to do. Like their offense wasn't, it was actually started off well against Penn State, then kind of got cold and then put the game away late when they needed to put the game away.
To your point about Andy Kotelnicki, I think he kind of went on the same journey that Mike Denbrock did to some degree. He was getting to learn his team. And for Mike Denbrock, it was accepting the fact, like, oh, okay, I have a mobile quarterback who can make plays with his arm when he needs to, but that's not going to be the focal point of this offense. And two, now arguably three really dynamic running backs with a fourth waiting in the wing that teams haven't really seen that much outside of garbage time, right? And so, I think it was the same thing for Andy Kotelnicki. The recipe for success for Penn State is not that complicated. Find ways to get 44 the football and just let Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton go to work. And it's worked. You know what I mean? Like I said, you don't outscore your playoff opponent 69-24 if you're not doing something right.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Exactly.
So, no, I agree. This matchup overall is going to be a fun one to watch. But I will say, and I do say this with confidence, if Notre Dame is able to play the game that they have been able to play, they've faced multitudes of different types of offenses this year. And I don't say that lightly. They've faced two. You want to know how different of offenses Notre Dame has faced this year? They've played two triple option defenses or offenses, but they were two completely different triple option offenses.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So they've seen a multitude of different landscapes of offenses, and that's not a shot at Penn State. Notre Dame just has the best defense, one of the best defenses in the country. So this one's going to be a fun one, Brian. But diving into it more specifically, right? We're going to talk about an area of Notre Dame's defense that had, I believe, up until last game when they turned some heads, was perceived to be, we'll call it the weakness of Notre Dame's defense, and it's their run defense versus Penn State's run game. And Penn State boasts a running back room that is, in my opinion, the only one that can be compared to Notre Dame's.
With all due respect to Ohio State, it's not.
Yeah.
It's
it's Penn State. And we
have said, by the way, we have said this before. This isn't new.
No,
this isn't something we're saying because it's Penn State and we're trying to do ours. We've said this before. This is, in my opinion, the second best running back duo in college football behind the Notre Dame duo.
No, I agree. I mean, like of the teams left in the playoffs, like you have good running back matchups. Honestly, that is kind of fun to talk about, which I know different story for a different show.
Can we say something real fast? All four teams in the playoff right now have really good 1-2 punches at running back. All four.
Yes.
Because now I'd say Texas is at the bottom of that list. With all due respect to the Texas kids, they're significantly fourth, but they're still good. Jadon Blair and the Wisner kid are still good running backs.
Yeah.
But I would argue that 3 of the 4 best 1-2 punches in college football at running back are still in the playoffs, if not the best 3.
Yeah, are
still in the playoffs, which I think is fascinating.
Yeah,
and Notre Dame just beat a team that had a pretty darn good duo at running back as well in Travis Etienne and Nate Frazier, but I think this group is obviously better.
Yeah. Oh, I do too. I agree. It's almost like running the football works. But when you start taking a look at this matchup from a numbers perspective, right? I think Notre Dame, like I said before, I think they turned a lot of heads with what they did to Georgia's rushing offense. When you hold a team like Georgia's rushing offense to, what was it, 62, 64 yards rushing on the game, I think that turns a lot of heads.
On 29 attempts, by the way. They held Indiana to 63, by the way.
Jeez. But now they're going up against, I think, their first 1,000-yard back duo that they faced all season.
Was there even another 1,000-yard duo in the country?
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know that there is. It's
the only.
Yeah, I think it is. I could be wrong. As far as well, actually, Trev, let me look at something real quick, real fast. Notre Dame has played a team with 2,000-yard rushers before. Army.
Was it? Okay, I was going to ask if it was Bryson Daly.
Bryson Daly had over 1,600, and Kanye Udo had 1,100.
Okay.
So they actually have faced now that's 2 ball carriers. This is 2 running backs, but against the triple option, it's the same thing. So as soon as I said that, I was like, hold on a second. No, I think that it might have actually played a team that's got a couple 1,000-yard rushers before.
Okay.
That would be Army.
But this matchup is fascinating for a bunch of different reasons. I mean, you have a really good 1-2 punch in Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen because they're two different styles of running backs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing that, like, we always talk about how well Jadarian Price and Jeremiah Love complement each other. Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen complement each other extremely well. So, it's one of those that it's going to be interesting to see how Notre Dame's defense stacks up against them. You know what I mean?
I think Katron Allen and Nicholas Singleton are what Ohio State fans think Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson are. Because Travion Henderson is Nicholas Singleton. They're like very similar players.
Mm-hmm.
I think Ohio State fans think Quinshon Judkins is as good as Katron Allen, and he's not.
I think they think that, yeah.
That's what I said. They are what the Ohio State fans think their duo is.
Mm-hmm.
And although I think Henderson, like I mean, what did I say going into that the Tennessee and Oregon games? Like, they got to find ways to get Travion Henderson in space. And what was one of the early big plays of that game? It was Travion going off, and then they went back to Judkins all the time.
Oh yeah,
but like Koldenicki, when they're healthy, does a much better job of using both of them together than Ohio State does, because I think Ohio State forces the ball to their second back.
Yeah.
Where Penn State's Allen is their lead back and Singleton is their change of pace back.
Right.
Where Katron will get his 120 on 15 carries. Singleton get his 120 on 10 carries, 11 carries, 12 carries. Kind of looking at it that way. Yeah. So
absolutely.
That's the big key. That's going to be, and Penn State fans like to talk about, oh, they were injured. I mean, that's fine. You can say whatever you want. I mean, but isn't part of being a great running back room being healthy? I mean, that's kind of part of being a great room, right? But this is an outstanding backfield. There's no question this is an outstanding backfield. But Notre Dame, you could say Notre Dame hasn't faced a running back duo like this, and I would respond by saying that is true, but Penn State has not faced a defense like this.
Yeah.
Because we've pointed to this. Like, you look at the numbers. Let's talk about the rush defense, Trev, because we transitioned to that. And is that can I make that transition?
Oh yeah.
So look at like Penn State's rushing numbers. They're 18th in college football in rushing yards per game. They're 17th in yards per carry, 15th in touchdowns, 23rd in runs, 30-plus runs on the season. They're 14th in fewest tackles for loss allowed per game on the season. They've given up 59 in 14 games. Look at Notre Dame, you're like, well, they rank 34th in rushing yards. Okay, that's pro advantage Penn State, you'd think. They rank 25th in college football in yards allowed per attempt. You'd think that's advantage Penn State. Notre Dame has only allowed 11 rushing touchdowns, and Notre Dame has only allowed 3 runs all season of 30 yards or more. And on one of those runs, the team had the ball stripped away from them at the end of that run. So something to consider on that particular run as well. But when you look at it, and you break it down, you realize that Notre Dame has actually been a lot more impressive with a run defense than their numbers show. So Penn State gets a lot of credit for how good their rush defense is, and it is. And in FBS, against FBS opponents, you take out the MAC teams and the option teams and the academies and all that, on the season, Penn State ranks 10th in college football, giving up 103 rushing yards per game amongst Power 5 teams. Now, 3 teams ahead of them have only played 1 or 2 games against Power 5 teams, so it's really 7th if you take those 3 teams.
Right.
7th in college football in rushing yards allowed. 2 spots behind them is Notre Dame, who's given up 106.2 rushing yards per game on the season against Power 5 teams. So, and then if you also look at Penn State, they're 8th in college football in yards allowed per rush. 2 teams have played 2 or only 1 game ahead of them, so really they're 6th. At 3.1 per game. Notre Dame at 3.12. Notre Dame is 8th. So Penn State 6th, Notre Dame is 8th at 3.25 rushing against Power 5 teams. So you got to look at the numbers are really inflated by playing 2 triple option teams. And my point is, Notre Dame allowed over 400 yards in those 2 games, but held those 2 teams to something like 70, 80 yards below their season average combined.
Army, they held them to, it was like 114 under their season average.
And Navy was like 25.
Mm-hmm.
So what's that on average? Be like about 80?
Yeah.
60 to 80 yards below their season average.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to take that into account when you're trying to compare the numbers, because the reason isn't to spin it for Notre Dame. It's okay, but we're trying to talk about how they match up against Penn State. And so how they match up against Penn State is what they've done against the other, 12 teams that don't run the triple option. And so it's like, you're not, hey, no, Notre Dame shut down the only other team that has 2,000-yard rushers, so they're going to shut down Penn State. That's nothing to do with each other. They run completely different offenses. So that's something to take into account is Notre Dame's run defense is every bit as good as Penn State statistically. And when you look at some of the offenses that Notre Dame has faced this year, Trevor, that have been pretty good rushing teams, Notre Dame has shut them down. Georgia Tech, we've talked about before. Indiana, we talked about how good they were running the football. Indiana finished as the number 5 team in the Big Ten in rushing this year. The only reason they're 5th is because they had to play Notre Dame in the first round of the playoffs. And Notre Dame held them to 60. They were on average 4 yards per game below Ohio State. And if you look at their numbers before they played Notre Dame, they were at 170 something, which would have put them at worst 4th. Actually, I'm going to look that up real quick and see what they were. But you get the point that we're making here, Trev.
Oh yeah.
Against this type of offense, Notre Dame has done well shutting these type of offenses down since the Northern Illinois game. Now the question is, okay, but have they faced a running back duo like this? And then the answer is no. Has Penn State faced a rush defense like Notre Dame's? I would argue that the answer is no. Well, actually, you could say yes, but Penn State fans won't count it because they'll say that the running backs were banged up because that was Ohio State. So Indiana was at 173.6 coming into that game, which would have put them number 4 in the Big Ten, just behind Rutgers at 175.3. And then playing Notre Dame dropped them down. So Notre Dame played that offense and rush offense and completely shut it down. So just making the point that this is a much better rush defense than I think even a lot of Notre Dame fans give it credit for. And it's been that way all because we have, the Haynes King didn't play. Well, okay, but based on what we see now, do we really think that would have made that much of a difference? I don't think that it would have. This has been a team that's been pretty good at shutting down the run, except a couple games where they, like Louisville, where they basically said, we're going to dare you to run. We're going to give you runs because we don't want you to throw the football. So that makes this matchup huge, Trevor, because we're not saying all that to say so they will dominate Penn State. It's to say that they stack up very well against Penn State. Now the key is the execution, and it all starts, Trev, up front. Can the Notre Dame D-line dominate the Penn State offensive line? It's not even about stopping Singleton and Allen. It's about doing that. Georgia did not shut down Love and Price. Georgia dominated the offensive line. That's why Notre Dame struggled to run the football. And that's why they needed Riley Leonard to carry the day. Same thing is going to be true here. Can you dominate at the point of attack or not? That's going to determine what happens with the running backs in the run game. That's going to be the huge matchup, Trev.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely key number one. Is due to Penn State's offensive line what Georgia did to yours. Now, I don't know if you have like the exact same personnel to be able to do that, right? Like, I don't know if Notre Dame has like a Nazir Stackhouse. Gabe Rubio played really well, right? But like, it's different.
Well, you do it your way.
Yeah, right. The second kind of key to run game success that I would bring up is, again, it's what I explained that opposing defenses have to do to Notre Dame's running backs is you have to tackle well in space. That is another thing that Notre Dame's defense has done really, really well. You brought up the missed tackle rates for Notre Dame's defense. This can't be the game where those numbers don't hold true, right? Because they have guys that run the football really well. Nicholas Singleton is one of those guys, man, that if he makes a guy miss, he could be gone, right? And Katron Allen is a really, really strong runner.
Yeah.
Right? He's tough to bring down.
Good feet.
Yes. And they do a really good job of getting the shoulder square, man. They do a good job of getting the shoulder square, and they move. They move downhill north and south really, really well. And another person that you're going to have to defend with Penn State's run game is their tight end, Tyler Warren. When they line him up in the backfield, so there's going to be a lot of different things that Notre Dame's defense is going to have to do. But on top of being able to dominate their offensive line, being key point number one and the biggest number one, behind that, you have to be able to tackle well, because that's something that they've done really well all season. And this can't be the football game that those numbers, those missed tackle numbers, as low as they are that you brought up, this has to be the game that those numbers hold true.
Yep.
Right. Because if the D-line does their job and the linebackers are able to come in and fill, I mean, those boys were hitting against Georgia, man. I mean, they were popping. The pads were popping. They were bringing the wood. It has to be the same thing against Penn State.
Yeah.
It has to be. So,
and you have to be disciplined.
Yep.
I mean, you absolutely have to be disciplined. You have to, like you said, tackle well, be in your gaps, be in your lanes, handle your job. I mean, Katron Allen forced 9 missed tackles against Boise State, like 9 missed tackles. That's a pretty good day's work. You can't let him do that. You can't let him do that against you if you're Notre Dame. You're going to have to bring him down. One thing they've been great at all year, Trev, is they've been great at rallying to the football. And this is a team that in the last 2 games has forced 11 missed tackles according to Pro Football Focus in each of their last 2 games. You can't let that be the case in this game. Can't. You're going to have to do a better job of tackling than those 2 teams have done. And if they can do that, then I think they have a shot to slow this run game down. No doubt in my mind that they have a shot to slow this run game down. You know how many missed tackles they had forced against Ohio State? 3. Okay, whatever the reason, injury, whatever, that doesn't matter. That's what you have to do. You have to keep that in check. And that's going to be a big, big part of Notre Dame's success or lack thereof, Trevor, is that discipline in the run game. And if they can do that, then they'll have a shot at slowing it down. Being dominant up front and just rounding the football like they always have. Because, like, if Nicholas Singleton is able to make cuts and then re-accelerate, he's going to rip off a big run.
Oh, yeah.
You have to have it to where when he makes cuts, there's somebody right there hitting him again. When Katron Allen makes somebody miss, there's got to be somebody right there, boom, hitting them. And that's what they've been great at this year. And they were great at that against Georgia. Do I think Georgia's backs are as good as these backs? No, I do not. Do I think that they're a very talented duo? Yeah, they are. I mean, Etienne was the biggest running back name in the portal this past year. Nate Frazier was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. They're talented running backs. They're not as good as Singleton and Allen, but they're very good running backs, and Notre Dame was able to keep them in check. The kids at Indiana are not as good as Singleton and Allen. They're not. But but they were also very productive in the same league, and Notre Dame shut them down. It's going to be a huge key. Now, the question is, can you shut them both down and, Trevor, slow down the pass game? And that's something that we're gonna have to see.
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be the area where, if I'm just being 100% honest, this is an advantage for Notre Dame, and I think the numbers back that up. Notre Dame's pass defense has again been one of the most elite pass defenses in college football, and in some areas, they are the most elite in college football. Right? You go through and you look at what they've done from a yards per game perspective. They rank 5th in the country. They rank top 5 in yards per game, yards per attempt, completion percentage allowed, where they are now number 1 in the country. Have been for last month or so, I would say. They rank number 4 in interceptions. They have, I think Penn State and Notre Dame are tied with interceptions and as a defense. I think they both have 18, if I read that number correctly when we were looking at Penn State's pass defense.
Notre Dame's at 18 as well in one fewer game.
Yep. And they are number 1 in pass efficiency defense. And they are the only team, I believe, that has held teams to under 100 points of pass efficiency, I believe. So you go through and you look at what Notre Dame has done this year on defense, and it's been elite, and there's no question about it, right? And then on the flip side of the coin, you take a look at what Penn State's been able to do from a passing efficiency standpoint, right? They're 44th in the country in yards per completion. They are 58th in the country in yards per game. Some of that is because, like what I mentioned, they're a balanced offense. Right. I mean, Penn State is a good offense. They're not that, Ohio State-esque, Oregon-esque type offense where they're going to start rattling off 500 yards a game. Right. But they are a balanced offense. They have 9 interceptions on the season. They have 30 passing touchdowns, which ranks 15th in the country. They are not as rough, but in a similar boat to Notre Dame, is they're not that much of an explosive pass offense either. Right, they have 15 pass plays of 30 yards or longer through 15 games. So on average, they're good for about 1 a game. They are a very efficient passing offense. They rank 8th in the country in pass efficiency. So again, this matchup on paper favors Notre Dame. It does, and their secondary is the strongest part of their defense, Brian.
It is, even with we've seen enough of them without Benjamin Morrison to say they're good there. I mean, if they were going to get exposed, it would have happened within the last 2 weeks in the postseason. Indiana or Georgia would have been able to expose them that way, and they just haven't been able to do so. But I would say the anomaly game was the USC game, and we say, well, man, but that's just, Jaden Maeva just had the game of his life. Well, Drew Aller's capable of throws like that. He's capable of getting hot like that. And we've seen it times this season, and this is part of the reason that I've like somebody yesterday was like, Drew Aller's overrated. He's had some awful games. And I'm like, well, what are these awful games that you refer to? I know one of the worst halves he played was against USC. And you know what he did in the second half? He destroyed USC in the second half of that game. Just ripped them apart. He didn't play great against Ohio State. He didn't have a whole lot of opportunities against Ohio State either. And that ultimately is going to be the thing. Ohio State is the one team that they face this year, in my opinion, that has a secondary that's is arguably as good as Notre Dame's. And I would say it's in the conversation since Benjamin Morrison's been out. It's in the conversation. You could argue, we could have a good debate with an Ohio State fan at who has the better secondary. But you're going to talk about two of the three best secondaries in college football, along with Texas, whose secondary has been exposed a little bit in the postseason as they've played better passing teams. I just want to point that out, Trevor. And this is why I said to Bill Bender a few weeks ago, like, with all due respect to Texas, who I think has the third best secondary in college football, number 1 and 2 are no-brainers. It's Notre Dame and Ohio State. And so if you're talking about a team that has the tools to slow down this Penn State pass attack, it is Notre Dame. Plus, Notre Dame's a very disruptive defense. And that's another big part of it. I mean, I looked at their defense this year compared to last year. They didn't have as many pressures in 13 games. This is going into Georgia. They didn't have as many pressures as they did against last year. I think they were like 30 total pressures short. However, Trevor, they had more sacks and hits on the quarterback in 13 games than they did last year. So a much higher percentage of their pressures were hitting home. And which is, I would say, is more important, which is not a surprise when you consider that their defense is as good as it is, but also why they force so many interceptions. Because they're when they come at you, because they don't blitz as much with their linebackers this year as they did last year in passing situations. And so I think those things, when you look at them, Trev, they factor into to why they're so effective at shutting down opponent pass games. I mean, last year they've given up a few more touchdowns this year, but as we've said, they've been a lot more disruptive this year than they were last year in the pass game, and that's been a big part of it. And you'd pointed this out. I'll point this statistic out. You had pointed out this number last year. Notre Dame's defense, which was pass defense, was great, by the way. Last year in 13 games, that defense had 64 passes defended, which is 4.9 per game. That was an elite secondary. This year, Notre Dame's pass defense has 78 passes defended, which is 5.6 per game. That's one whole per game jump. You're getting one more per game, basically, this year compared to last year. Little less than that. But it's a far more disruptive defense than it was a year ago. And that's played a big role in why this defense has been so good against the pass. But I think the pressure plays a role in it, which gets us back to kind of what we talked about in the pass game. If the Notre Dame secondary has to cover for longer periods of time, which was ultimately the biggest issue they had against USC, is their ability to get after the quarterback was not as good as it has been the rest of the year. That was a bigger issue to me than coverage. If you don't get to Drew Aller and let him get comfortable in the pocket, he will make big throws and you will have a hard time guarding Tyler Warren. You cannot cover that kid through a full drop back, read, go through your progressions type of play. The key is going to be you cannot let him get comfortable physically or mentally in this game. And I didn't think they did a great job of making Gunnar Stockton uncomfortable mentally. They did clearly physically, which is why after starting 7 for 7, he went 13 of 25 the rest of the way. With Drew Aller, you've got to make sure you lock him down a lot sooner. You've got to get to him early and often. You've got to give him looks that confuse him. He's not a guy that is great at speeding up his mechanics a whole lot and maintaining accuracy. You want him throwing off of his back foot. You want him running around. You want him looking for the pressure. Those are going to be big keys, and that's going to come from the front four, but also some very well-designed pressures to get to him. It's going to be a big key to this game. You know, Georgia's tackles are pretty good. They didn't give up a lot of sacks. Penn State's tackles don't give up a ton of sacks. They are playing their backup right tackle, but he's been pretty good. Nolan Rucci's been pretty solid since he stepped into the starting lineup. Notre Dame fans should be very familiar with him. They recruited him out of high school, but that's going to be a big thing, Trevor. You're going to have to get after the quarterback. That's going to be a big key, Now, here's one thing that I do find interesting is the guy that's given up the most pressures for their team is their center. He's allowed 28 pressures this season. That's Pat Coogan numbers from last year.
Yeah.
Trev. That makes me think, could this be where we finally see Howard Cross get back to looking like Howard Cross? You know what I mean? That's going to be a big part of this game. Big part of this game for me.
Yeah, they're going to have to be able to almost copy and paste the performance that they had against Georgia, right? From an efficiency standpoint, I don't know if they're going to do it in the exact same way because they're going up against a different team, right? But I love the point that you brought up is they can't wait that long, right? Yeah, like they, in my opinion, they were able to wait a little bit longer with Gunnar Stockton to get pressure on him to rattle him a little bit because this was his first ever start in college football. Drew Aller's not that way, right? He has played a lot of football. He is more experienced than what Gunnar Stockton was, and so Aller's a quarterback that if he's able to get into a rhythm early, he's pretty darn good, right? There's not a whole lot of throws that kid can't make. You know, despite what people think about him, and I'm Brian. I'm in the same boat as you. I'm still pretty high on Drew Aller. I mean, he has a good arm. There's some things where he needs to improve, which is why I'm glad that I think he's coming back next year.
He said shortly after Prabula left that he was going to come back.
Okay,
but there's also a lot of people saying he might be the number one quarterback in this draft class if he came out now, and you wonder how. Sure. The run that they've gone on may change things, but he has been said that he is coming back.
Yeah.
But Will Fuller also said at one point in time during his junior season he was coming back. Yeah. So, I hope he comes back.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
For his sake.
No, absolutely. But no, point being, Drew Aller's a quarterback that can hurt you. And he's able to get into a rhythm. And the best way that he does and get into a rhythm is when he's able to get the ball to 44 quickly, right? And get him going in the game. So, the next thing for me is can Notre Dame's pass defense find a way to slow down Tyler Warren? Is this going to be the defense to do what so many other teams have failed to do? Because the kid's a matchup nightmare. I mean, Tyler Warren is a really hard player to stop. What does that look like? What does stopping or holding a kid like Tyler Warren at bay look like? You know what I mean? So that is kind of the 1A, 1B. You have to get after Aller. You got to pressure him, and you have to find ways to contain Tyler Warren. Have to, because he's a player that can – I know we're going to talk about game records tomorrow, and if we're going to talk about a game record for Penn State, it's 44.
Yeah. I got a little stat for you, Trev, a little bonus stat before we answer some super chats and get out of here.
All right, man.
Here's two bonus stats. Number one, Georgia's interior. They're three starting in their center and their two starting guards. So Jared Wilson, Tate Ratledge, and Dylan Fairchild allowed 22 pressures the entire season. 18% of those pressures came against Notre Dame. 4 of their 22 came against Notre Dame this season. Penn State's starting center and 2 guards have given up 57 pressures this season. So their 3 starting guards have also allowed their 3 starting interior guys have also allowed a total of 5, 6, 8 hits plus sacks from the quarterback on the season. Wow. So you look at it and say, well, man, like if Notre Dame is able to have the effectiveness against that interior for Georgia, which had, I believe, all 3 of their center interior guys were all conference, all SEC. And Notre Dame dominated them. Can they have similar success against Penn State, whose interior is not quite as good, in my opinion? and especially their center. That's going to be a very intriguing matchup. Very intriguing matchup that I'm very curious to see how it plays out.
Yeah.
Very curious to see.
Yeah. No, that's going to be a fun matchup to talk about the rest of this week, Brian. It is. It's going to be really fun.
All right. So we got a couple super chats I want to get to, Trev, before we get out of here. I got to head to the airport. Iden Benami, 27 views for the Georgia post game. What's the most ever? I believe the thing we did after Brian Kelly got fired is still our most viewed ever, but I actually can look that up here while we're answering the rest of these questions here, Trev. But thank you for the super chat, Iden. Then we had one from Robert McCaffrey. Robert, thank you. Thank you so much. It says, Brian, thanks to you and your crew for the excellent job y'all do. Thank you for that, Robert. You guys are the best. Enjoy Florida. Should be 70s low during days and highs of 50 at night. So, Robert, I appreciate that very, very much. And I've packed for both the warmth and the chilly evenings. But I like just wearing jeans when I go out. I'm still just a jean guy even during the summer, but I pack some shorts. There's no doubt about that. Robert, but thank you so much for that super chat. I appreciate that. Now we can get it back up here to these, Trev. You can take these over.
Yeah, you got it, man. Super chat from 8, head coach Marcus Freeman, pecs in a white tee. Nice. If Xavier Watts is the one lined up to defend Tyler Warren in pass coverage, do you like that matchup? Why or why not?
No, I don't love it. Xavier Watts, because I think you're taking Xavier away from what he does best, which is more of a roamer and flying to the ball and reading the defense. I don't want him having to key on Tyler Warren all the time. I think you just play Tyler Warren in different ways. I think, part of it's bracketing him, but there's going to be times you're going to have to play him on Tyler Warren, and I'm okay with that. But look, Tyler Warren is a 6'6" kid. Notre Dame safeties are 6 foot and 5'11", and their nickels 5'10". So that's going to be something that Penn State's going to look at take advantage of is the size. It's just, hey, I don't care if Don Schuler is all over Tyler Warren. Throw it up in the air and let him go get it because he's 6'6" and the Don Schuler's 6 feet tall. And that's the thing is why the pressure is so important because you want him having to throw stuff on lines and over the middle. You don't want him being able to plant and throw the ball down the field on corners and seam routes and things like that where you can kind of take advantage of, of the size advantage he has. And he's a weird athlete because he doesn't look like a real dominant athlete. He really doesn't. You just look at it and you're just like, man, like this guy doesn't look like he's moving real fast. No. He's you know what he's like? He is the Riley Leonard of tight ends.
I mean, man,
you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like he doesn't look like he's dynamic, but you're like, how's this guy always open? Because he looks slow. He's not. He just the way he's built, he just doesn't look as dynamic really as you would think. So yeah. Real quick to answer that previous question, the Marcus Freeman's hired at Notre Dame is the biggest one we've ever had that had over 60,000. And then we had 2 mailbags that were bigger than that, and then the Brian Kelly one is 4th. So yeah, those are our biggest ones.
Nice.
We didn't have a single show. It's kind of sad. We didn't have a single show in 2025. That was one of our top 5 shows of the season. You'd have to go down till to number 7 to get one from this year. So we'll have to change that next year, Trev. But it was the Marcus Freeman show. But here's somebody asked me this the other day too, Trev, and I'm curious your opinion on this. Somebody said, would you consider putting Leonard Moore on him? And I said, no. Look, you're the best pass defense in college football. You don't have to change what you do. You have to have a plan for him. You have to know to some degree he's going to get his. You just can't let him hurt you. Mm-hmm. And there's been teams like Ohio State who've been able to kind of keep him in check in the pass game and just kind of take a page out of their book to a degree. But it's a lot of it's about get to the quarterback and bracket him with your athletic linebackers and your safeties over top so there aren't the windows to throw. I'm not going necessarily one-on-one all game with him. That's kind of where I'm at.
No, and they line him up in so many different spots that I think it's impossible to have like just one guy follow him around, all around the field. You know what I'm saying? I mean, they line him up in the backfield. They'll line him up. Sometimes they'll line him up next to Drew Aller, to get him into favorable matchups, potentially against other linebackers. They'll line him up at the Wildcat. They'll line him up traditionally at tight end. They'll flex him out to the outside. So like it's I don't want to say it's impossible. I just don't think it's needed to have this one player, because Xavier Watts means too much to the defense to take him out of everything else that he does so well. You know what I mean? to just lock him down on Tyler Warren. I'm more of a run your scheme. I'll always identify where he's at because that's a good tell of what the play might be overall. But if you do your job and you pressure Drew Aller, I mean, I think it'll be fine.
That's the key. That's the key. And honestly, your corners have to lock up their receivers. So
yeah,
that's another part of it.
Super chat from AST12321. Thank you for the super chat. I have seen a lot of Penn State fans adamant that they have a better running back room. Can't point to stats to back it up, but apparently the film is quite clear.
They could point to stats to back it up if they want to look at yards. I mean, they have 2,000-yard rushers and Notre Dame has 1. I mean, so if they had any ability to defend it, I mean, they could point to that. I mean, their 2 guys have rushed for more yards than Notre Dame guys have rushed for. Notre Dame's running backs have a giant advantage when it comes to touchdowns. There's no doubt about that. I mean, their 2 running backs have rushed for 17 touchdowns on the season, and Notre Dame's 2 running backs have rushed for, let's see here. I mean, Jeremiah Love's at, 16 by himself, 15 by himself. But Notre Dame's 2 running backs have rushed for 23 on the season. The other difference, too, is this is why, again, I say yards are a little bit sometimes can be a little bit misleading because they don't have a quarterback that's, if Notre Dame plays 2 more games, it's not out of the realm of possibility that they have 2,000-yard rushers, and it's not because it's Jadarian Price. It's because it'd be Riley Leonard, who's now at 831 yards. And so, I mean, that's the thing, Trevor, is it just what are you trying to argue if you're a Notre Dame fan? Are you trying to say, well, Notre Dame's backs are more talented? Oh, okay, that's a little bit more of a subjective thing to prove. I personally think that they are, although I think Penn State's guys are certainly talented. There's no question about it. Are you trying to say, hey, they're more productive? Well, yeah, they are. They have a lot more pass game production, and they've rushed for more yards this season. Notre Dame's backs, you say, are more efficient. Notre Dame's backs average 7 yards a carry. That's not close to what Penn State's at. I mean, Penn State's leading yards per carry guy, Nick Singleton's at 6'5". Like he'd be if we're comparing all the backs in yards per carry, he's 3rd. You know what I mean? Behind Love and Price. And Drew and Riley Leonard averages more yards per carry by almost half a yard than Katron Allen. Well, then the counter they would say is, yeah, but they were banged up, blah, 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 blah. Okay, sure, whatever. Like Jeremiah Love's been the peak, form of health the last 2 games where he's still, made some big time plays. So look, here's the reality. They're both excellent. What's going to determine this game is not necessarily those backs though. It's does the lines block? Does the pass game step up? Can the quarterback make plays? Because both teams are going to say, we can't let those running backs beat us. The advantage that the Penn State running backs have is they have a tight end to take some pressure off of them. Well, as a pass game, the advantage that Notre Dame has is they have a quarterback that can take the pressure off of them in the run game. So whose complementary players compared to the backs are what step up? But look, I'm not going to sit here and crush Penn State people for thinking that their backs are better than Notre Dame's. They've watched. What I got mad at on Twitter was some quote unquote national analyst talking about how their backs are better when he then admits that he hasn't even studied Jeremiah Love. If he hasn't studied Jeremiah Love, he definitely hasn't studied Jadarian Price. It's just a lazy take. I don't care if a fan base feels that way. I don't agree, but like we've both said for weeks that this is the number 2 running back room in the nation. So it's not like we're saying they're 15th and their fans think they're number 1. These are the 2 best. That's what matters.
Guys, at the end of the day, we're splitting hairs here. You know what I mean? I think a lot of fans can sometimes get hung up on like who has the better position group insert here, right? And at the end of the day, it's whoever wins the game comes down to who executes better. I mean, Georgia's defensive line was better than Notre Dame's offensive line, and Georgia lost by 13 points. Like it's not always like, well, this is better than yours, so we're just better. It's like, well, just like it's about how the game plays out. It's who's the better team. Sometimes it's a case of who's the better team that day. You know what I mean? Like that's how I look at it, to be honest with you. I mean, if Penn States are adamant that they have a better running back room, it's I'm not going to fight them on it. I'm not. Like It's going to take more than just Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen, and it's going to take more than just Jeremiah Love and just Jadarian Price to win the Orange Bowl. That's the way that I look at it.
Absolutely, Trev. And then last Super 2 couple here. We have one from Matt 2011 GT for Super Chat for all your efforts battling revisionist history this week. So we have both been engaging in that online battle, Trevor, no question. And then Andy Milton with the last one. Is Penn State the most difficult matchup Notre Dame has faced? No, I don't think so. They're a very, very good football team. I think last week's game was the most challenging matchup for Notre Dame.
Yep, I think so too.
And I would argue that Texas A&M was a more challenging matchup as well. Again, doesn't say best team. Texas A&M is not a better team than Penn State. They're not. If they played in a bowl game, I'd pick Penn State to win and probably Penn State to cover whatever the spread would be. It's about matchup. And the teams that have matched up well against Notre Dame are teams that are big and physical on defense. And that's not Penn State. It isn't.
Yep, I agree.
So, but that doesn't mean Penn State's not a really good team, and it doesn't mean Penn State can't beat Notre Dame if Notre Dame doesn't play well.
Mm-hmm.
It just means what your question was, is this the most difficult matchup? And I don't think that it is. So nope. That's it, Trev. What else you got before we get out of here, man?
No, nothing. I was gonna wrap us up. So
do it.
All right, guys. Well, thank you for being with us for the better half of 2 hours here. Our fearless leader, Coach Driscoll, has to head on down to Miami to get ready for the Orange Bowl himself. So we're going to let him get out of here, and he has a flight to catch. But before we all get out of here, let's make sure that we hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, share this podcast with your friends and family, anybody else that you know loves Notre Dame as much as you do. Be sure to leave us a 5-star review on any platform that you guys watch us on, whether it be Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever that is. And, of course, the best way to support what we do here, go to boards.irishbreakdown.com and subscribe to the premium message boards. That's where all of the great content's going to be coming out. We're going to be cranking it out here until game day up on Thursday. And there's going to be more great content, obviously, throughout the rest of the year leading into the 2025 season, because it's already 2025, and I think that's crazy to say. But until next time, Bryan and you and I will be back tomorrow at 1. Mm-hmm. We will be back tomorrow at 1 to continue breaking down this matchup. We will be one day closer to kickoff in the Orange Bowl. So for Bryan, I'm Trevor. That'll do it for us on the Irish Breakdown podcast, and we will see you back here very, very soon. Have a good rest of your day.